Class, MASH. By A. Nutty. Synopsis. In a world full of magic and power, where strength is defined by classes and levels. Follow MASH, a young boy who gets to experience the wonders of the world, from receiving his first class to realizing his dreams, and all the little progress in between. Although things don't go as he predicted. His first class defined him as something he was not, yet it offered him a new opportunity. Only through gaining experience and levels can he even begin to reach his dreams, whatever they may be. After having his first real fight, MASH catches a glimpse into the profound wrongness in his world. In this moment of revelation, MASH's life takes a new path, one he will have to carve for himself. A path that was not for knights, heroes, or kings, instead one for gods, of power beyond even his own understanding. Chapter 1, From the Bottom. MASH lay in bed, his heavy blanket rested just beneath his chin. He wanted to sleep during the day so that he would be able to stay awake all night. It was his 5th birthday tomorrow, and that meant he would get assigned his first class. He was shaking with anticipation. He began shifting around trying to find a more comfortable position. There was no position that would stop his excitement though. He tried a bunch of different things to try and fall asleep, but nothing would work. He played a lot in the morning so that he would be tired now, but it felt like a warm-up, and he wanted to do more now. He had eaten a big lunch in hopes that it would make him feel lazy. Instead it made him feel like he needed to burn the excess energy and fueled his excitement. Maybe if he checked his stats, he would get lucky and see his class early. He heard it happen to some people but didn't know how. He simply focused in on himself and felt the information rush into his head. Name, MASH class, none. Level, 0. Health, 20/20. Stamina, 30/30. Mana, 20/20. Fortitude, 2. Endurance, 3. Strength, 1. Agility, 2. Intelligence, 2. Wisdom, 1. Charisma, 1. Skills, none. His abilities wouldn't impress the best, but he managed to raise his endurance beyond what most kids could. Most kids only got their stats up to 2, and only through a lot of hard work. He wanted to raise all his stats but figured it wouldn't be possible for him. He couldn't change his body. Being friendlier than expected, he knew he wouldn't be able to get his strength up quickly. He hoped his class would be able to rectify the weakness. One of his friends grew a few inches as soon as he got his class. Apparently, he got a strength-focused class, and the sudden boost forced his body to adjust. If he got something like his brother, it would cause his body to change. Charisma too seemed to be lost to him. MASH's grey hair and black eyes made him look like someone had wrung the colors out of him. Wearing his brother's hand-me-downs didn't help either. His hair was supposed to be a silver grey, and his eyes should have had a similar shine. Instead, his hair was pale grey, and his irises were pitch black. His family told him that his eyes stole the color from his hair. His eyes seemed to bother the other children, and even some of the adults avoided eye contact. It made it difficult for him to make friends, so he ended up growing closer to his family. It grated at him. He couldn't raise his charisma because of his appearance. It's not like he chose it or could even do anything about it. That wasn't even the worst one though. He just didn't get wisdom. He read a lot of books trying to raise it but only managed to raise his intelligence. He decided he would try for strength, even if it was unlikely to change, and got up to work out. His room wasn't large. Being the youngest, he hadn't been able to pick his room and ended up in whatever was left. His parents were successful however, and there were enough rooms for him to get one to himself. They weren't nobles or merchants, so they didn't have a mansion, although their house was almost as big. With 4 bedrooms, a living room, kitchen, and 2 bathrooms, it was as close to being a proper mansion as you could get. Around the outside of the house there was a yard with a small garden where his mother grew some herbs. She was a healer and used the herbs to make medicine. MASH glanced around his room. It was a mess, and the floor was littered with toys and books. A small chest rested at the foot of his bed and a drawer for his clothes leaned against one of the walls, but he didn't bother using them. His floor worked just as well, and it felt like it was easier to find what he needed when it was all laid out. Looking over his things, he grabbed an old brown jacket. It was a hand-me-down from his brother, but it was comfortable, and more importantly, durable. He also grabbed a stick that he had leaning by his door. It was the perfect stick, long enough to act like a long sword and light enough that he could swing it freely. Fully equipped, he slid out of his house and into the yard. The sun was out but it was still a little chilly. The occasional gust of wind made him shiver slightly as he stood in the yard. Rather than immediately practicing with his sword, he started with some light exercises to warm up. He began with some stretches to avoid injuries that mainly involved running around the yard and some push-ups. After he stopped feeling cold, he started swinging the stick in a rhythmic overhand swing. He was working on putting his weight behind the swing like his father had shown him. It was difficult, and Mash thought it would work as strength training. Mash's father saw him once he came home and walked around to the yard to instruct him. His father held the Knight Commander class. It was a powerful class that gave him a lot of stats. It also granted him skills that made his teaching more effective and precise. His father was tall and fearsome. He was like a big statue, and in his armor seemed to tower over everyone around him. He had short-cut silver hair and light brown eyes that seemed to darken as he looked down at you. Every other adult Mash ever met seemed to cower a bit before his father, but Mash never felt any of that fear. Maybe it was because of how quiet he was around Mash's mother, but his father always felt reserved to Mash. His father was pushing Mash hard, and his precise instructions carried Mash late into the night. Mash looked up to his father and was hoping he would get the night class like his brother. The night class was one of the most desirable classes for kids. Getting the class meant that they got to skip the night apprentice class and would be able to go further as they leveled. Furthermore, the class provided a lot of stats, and gave combat skills early. The class was general enough, that they could become almost anything. It was a starting step to power and was much easier to get access to than magic classes. The class could also level without fighting monsters, instead from training with other knights. They were like healing classes, which could level by treating people. He trained hoping to earn the class. The rest of his family had come home before he was done and were preparing a feast for Mash's birthday. When Mash finished exercising, he immediately rushed into the bathroom to take a bath. He would have liked to keep going, but now that the sun was down it was too cold, and his father had sent him to take a bath to warm up. His mother had left him a bucket filled with hot water, and there was a new bar of soap too. His family was going all out today, and Mash enjoyed washing himself with the hot water. He stepped into the remaining water and was able to relax in the large bucket. He was still small enough that he could sit comfortably inside. The rest of his family had to go to the local bathhouse if they wanted to relax this way. While melting into the warm water, he focused on his stats to see if there had been any improvements. Name, Mash class, none. Level, 0. Health, 20/20. Stamina, 40/40. Mana, 20/20. Fortitude, 2. Endurance, 4. Strength, 1. Agility, 2. Intelligence, 2. Wisdom, 1. Charisma, 1. Skills, none. His strength didn't change but he practically jumped out of the bath when he saw his endurance. Even his brother hadn't been able to get a stat to 4 before his 5th birthday. Deciding that he was clean enough, he rushed down the stairs to brag to his brother. He left a trail of water behind him as he charged into the living room. His brother and sister were talking with their father about something when Mash burst in. His brother got the night class and worked with father to level the class. He was essentially a smaller version of father, but somehow managed to look even more apathetic. He never showed more than the smallest reactions, and everyone praised him saying that he was mature beyond his age. On top of that, he was wildly talented and had the stats to prove it. His parents often joked that he was the hero, but just didn't get the class yet. He was even named Arthur after the name of an old hero. His sister on the other hand hadn't fully inherited his mother's beauty. Only 2 years older than Mash himself, she was far taller than him. In fact, she was unusually tall for her age, dwarfing the other children. Her silver hair curled near her shoulders, and her silver eyes that reflected the moon. Her parents named her Lunaria, after the goddess of the moon. She didn't look like the goddess though and was a combination of his mother's delicate features and his father's stockiness. The strange combination made her seem awkward. His mother guaranteed that she would be a peerless beauty in the future, but Mash couldn't picture it. Mash thought she would always be a little awkward. She had the nurse class and was talented, although not as much as his brother. I got my endurance to 4. Mash was screaming as he stood before them, he was smiling widely as his pride swelled. His tone a clear challenge to his brother. His face doubly so as he tried his best to smirk at him. Bursting with joy, it came out as a toothy smile. His brother remained silent, uncaring of the direct challenge. His sister was clearly surprised though, as her eyebrows rose unnaturally high. However, his father was the one to speak. "Put on some clothes, boy." He said the words harshly, but Mash only noticed his smile. His father rarely smiled, and Mash relished in it as he ran back upstairs to put on his clothes. He had a new pair of clothes laid out on his bed. His mother insisted he get something that actually fit, instead of the oversized clothes of his brother. His father wanted Mash to have more practical clothing, so the set before him had surprised him. It wasn't particularly fancy, and the shirt was comfortable and durable enough to run in. Despite the practicality, the shirt had detailed embroidery of silver snakes wrapped around the long sleeves of an otherwise uniform black. His pants were similarly thick and made of black cotton that matched with his shirt, the pockets lined with the same silver. It would be perfect to wear at this time of the year. His birthday landed on the 6th day of the 13th month, a cold season that was usually accompanied by layers of snow. However, this season seemed to be changing earlier as the weather had started moving into the first warm season already. Mash rejoined his family, showing off his clothes in a confident strut. The rest of the night went perfectly for Mash. His mother had made all his favorite foods and his siblings had gotten him a book on advanced classes. He wouldn't have to worry about it until he was 15, when his class would advance, but with this he could at least try and guide his class. The book would tell him what he should try, to direct his class towards the more common and well-known classes. It would provide a list of weapons or exercises that he could perform to increase the chance to get offered a class. When someone advances their class, they would be offered a selection of 3 based on everything they had done leading up to that moment. Classes represented who a person was and defined how they lived. He would look at it later, but for now he was far too distracted with the time. Despite not being nobles, they had a clock in their house. His father, being a military general, had a clock, and Mash used it to see when the next day would start. The clock worked by comparing the sun mana with the moon mana, so that it could gauge the time of day. It was through this, that Mash could tell that there were only a few minutes left in the day. His family had grown quiet, and everyone was staring at the clock. Even without a clock, Mash could tell as his stats adjusted for the new class and he got his skill. At first it felt like he was being stuffed with energy and he started shaking as it kept growing. It quickly became too much, and the feeling had changed. Mash felt like he was drowning. The energy wouldn't stop, Mash couldn't focus, couldn't breathe. There was a pressure growing in his body, like a balloon he was being filled far beyond what he could contain. He tried to hold it in, to preserve as much of the energy as he could. It was like trying to hold his breath underwater, eventually he would drown. As soon as he felt like he could last no longer, the feeling left, and the pressure and energy escaped out of whatever exit it could find. Immediately Mash thought on his class. Falling to his knees as the information flooded his mind. It defined him as a coward. Name, Mash class, runner. Level, 1. Health, 60/60ths. Stamina, 100/100. Mana, 40/40ths. Fortitude, 6. Endurance, 10. Strength, 2. Agility, 5. Intelligence, 4. Wisdom, 2. Charisma, 1. Free stats, 2. Skills, endure. Endure, go beyond your limits. Continue current action even after depleting stamina. Chapter 2, Moving Forward. Father's P.O.V. He was having trouble keeping his calm. Normally, he found it easy to forgive Mash's mistakes and behavior, but this was unacceptable. He wanted to know what class his son had gotten, but Mash was just staring into the ground, obvious disappointment marring his face. He spoke with as much authority as he could muster, managing to contain his worry and expectations. Son, what class did you get? He kept the patience out of his voice, forcing Mash to react and give him a truthful answer. The words he spoke were strained, and quiet enough that he needed to lean in closer to hear. Runner. Trailing off as Mash revealed the class, he glanced around between them. As his father, he felt waves of emotion pour through him. Disappointment, at not being at the level of his siblings, or even receiving a respectable class. Anger, at getting a class that defined Mash as a coward. Regret, as he blamed himself for not properly guiding Mash to receive a better class. He had grown complacent since his other 2 children had received good classes without any intervention on his part. As his father, he didn't know what to say now though, remaining calm had taken most of his effort. He wanted to explode at Mash, asking him about what he did to receive this class. With his given stats he should have been able to get something better. Being a military commander meant that there were certain expectations of him, and he could already feel the whispers and stares that would follow his back for raising his son to be a coward. Though it wasn't the end of the world yet, Mash could still learn to correct his behavior. Getting his son a better class should be possible, he would just need to be stricter with Mash. Not knowing what to say or how to look at his son, he turned to face his wife, and saw tears beginning at the edges of her eyes. The light having faded from her eyes as the reality settled in. From the corner of his eyes, he saw Mash getting up and running to his room, clutching his presents to his chest. He would need to comfort his son, but his priority was his wife. He could check on Mash tomorrow and come up with a plan for him. Underscore 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 un. Mash p.o.v. Sitting on his bed, Mash combed over the book that his siblings had gifted him. His family's mixed reactions to his class caused his thoughts to spiral. His siblings had taken it in stride, telling him that he was overreacting and that his current class didn't matter. His parents, on the other hand, had been stunned, only nodding after his brother started explaining what Mash should do moving forward. Mash didn't hear much either since his mind was focused solely on his failure. However, he had needed to face them, and looked towards his parents. He felt their disappointment more than saw it, his vision blurring with the beginnings of tears. It was the silence that gnawed at Mash, and he wished that they would say something. Hoping to hear them yell at him, he had sat there waiting but nothing came. Instead, Mash tried to see what was written on their faces, even if just to confirm what he believed would be there. His mother had a pained expression and was on the verge of tears herself, looking at Mash like he had died. Mash pushed through his growing sense of dread and glanced at his father. His usually stoic father had grimaced as Mash met his eyes, and Mash's heart sank when his father looked away. Mash shuddered remembering the gesture, and how he lost all control of himself and ran into his room. He didn't want to cry in front of them. Even after calming down, he could easily picture their faces. Sitting there, he was no longer reading the book, instead trying to drive the scene from his mind. He wished he had paid more attention to his brother's advice. As if on cue, Arthur opened the door and walked into Mash's room as if nothing had changed. "You really should clean your room, I'm surprised you don't trip walking around in here." His voice carrying its usual calm tone, and Mash felt a little comfort in realizing that his brother, at least, would treat him the same. Something was different though, and Mash focused on the stack of paper between his arms. With a tone that left no room for argument, he handed Mash the papers and spoke firmly. "This is what you are going to do starting tomorrow." Mash looked down at the papers and realized they were a series of exercises with times that seemed agonizingly early. His brother was not done there, as he took a seat on the bed and seemed ready to give him a lecture. Mash was feeling down and wasn't ready for this. He tried cutting off his brother, but his brother barreled forward ignoring him altogether. "I can tell that you're unhappy with your class. I won't lie and tell you that it's great, but it is good enough. Did you actually read the book?" Mash was not prepared to answer the question but managed to push some words out. "I looked at the runner class a little bit." He sounded like a spiteful brat, and he knew it. Looked was a good way to put it, having read up on his one skill and then just staring at the picture of a man running. His brother either didn't seem bothered or didn't care and pressed on. "So, what skill did you get?" "Endure." The single word came out with more anger than he had intended. Mash wanted to apologize but couldn't muster the energy for it, not wanting to talk about his class at all, especially now. "It's a good skill, meant for developing your stats. While it won't help you once your stats get around 20, it should help you get there, before your next class. The plan is straightforward enough, but I will help you with it tomorrow. After that, you should be able to handle it on your own. Raise your strength to 15, and I bet you will probably be offered a night variant class." His brother, unbothered by Mash's tone, spoke easily. His words had comforted Mash, since his knowledge of the skill showed how much effort he put in. His brother paused to give Mash the opportunity to look at the exercises. Mash froze as he fully processed his words and immediately began scanning the schedule. If he could become a knight, then that would solve everything. It was a class that everyone had wanted. He would no longer be a coward. Looking at the schedule, he realized that he would not have much time to play, which was a small price to pay for getting a better class. There was something else there too. He felt a strange eagerness to train. To get use out of his skills and progress his class. Normally, he wouldn't want to work so early in the morning, but looking at the schedule made him want to start immediately. Not knowing the cause, he was glad to feel the desire to improve, believing it would let him get a better class. "I'll do it, let's start now, I can." The words poured out of Mash like a flood. He wanted to feel like he was doing something useful. In fact, just running would be enough, and he wanted to get going. "No, go to sleep for now, and in the morning, we can get started." His brother's reply had blocked Mash's words like a dam. Wanting to argue, he was about to speak, but his brother's next words stopped that idea. "If you don't go to sleep and instead decide to start exercising, then I will make you wait a week in bed before starting." The words were said coldly. It was times like these which made him seem more mature than his age. He was 13 and would be considered an adult when he turned 15, but that didn't stop him still acting like their father. "Fine, I will go to sleep." Giving him a smug salute, Mash found himself grinning stupidly. "Good night, Mash." His brother smirked a little as he said the words and headed to the door. Mash smiled a little more when he noticed how carefully his brother was walking. "Good night, and thanks, Arthur." Mash did begin to feel more optimistic as he lay in bed, the conversation playing out in his head. Perhaps it wouldn't be so bad after all. 10 minutes later, Mash was lying in bed. He wasn't asleep though, planning on waiting for a bit before getting up and starting on some of his brother's exercises. His brother wouldn't find out anyways. He heard a knock on his door though. Mash knew it wasn't his father or brother, as they would never knock. He was worried it was his mother and wanted to stay silent, but had thought better of it. Some small part of him wanted to talk with his mom. "You can come in." Mash said the words apprehensively. The door opened, revealing his sister. She started walking in, with a book in each hand, when she tripped and fell. "Will you clean your room? You are not some kind of animal. At least turn on some lights." The words came out as a loud whisper as she pushed herself to her feet. Mash immediately complied. He leaned over the bed and pushed the window open. His window had small wooden doors, that he needed to push out to let air in. This was easily Mash's favorite part of his room. Just by having the window open there would be enough light for him to see easily. Most of the rooms had glass windows, but his didn't, and he was glad for it. Feeling the outside air was comfortable. "I'm sorry, I didn't think about it." Giving some deference to his sister, as she was the one that usually helped Mash with his studies, he apologized honestly. However, his eyes were following the books though as he spoke his next words. "What are those?" "These are to help you get a better class. One is a book that mages use to feel mana, and the other is my notebook to help guide you while you read. People can only really start doing these after getting their first class, and it's complicated. I don't know what class you will end up with, but it will probably let you escape your current class." She rushed through the words, speeding up as she spoke more excitedly. Catching her excitement, he began shaking in his bed. Finding himself grinning, he knew that he wasn't smiling because of the books, rather because both his siblings had made plans to help him. "Thank you, Luna." Mash could feel himself smiling and didn't even mean to, it just felt right. His sister was smiling now too, telling Mash about the basics of each book, and what he should do to get started. Mash couldn't grasp it exactly but was able to understand how mana functioned. If he could just figure out how to feel it, then he could start working with it. He couldn't feel it within him and figured he would have to look at some of the methods in the book. Normally, one would only bother learning this if they had a magic-related class. Mash believed that if he could figure it out, it would guarantee him a magic-related class. His sister yawned, and Mash followed like an echo. Speaking through the next yawn, she said her goodbyes. "Good night, Mash, I'm going to go to sleep." She got up and carefully made her way to the door, making sure not to trip again. "Oh, and happy birthday." "Thanks, and good night, Luna." Mash was genuinely grateful but was distractedly looking through the books at his feet. He felt like he was close and the exercises in the books seemed to be getting him somewhere. Normally, it would be difficult to sit still, but performing the exercise was enjoyable. Each attempt was more fun than playing aimlessly. He found them to be like the meditation skills that monks would have, but more focused on connecting to ambient mana in the world. Another thing that was different was that rather than sitting as you did for monk meditations, mages would meditate by focusing on their breathing. Maybe he could mix the two. He pulled out the book he had gotten earlier and flipped to one of the pages on monks. He found the meditation skill easily enough as it was one of the most common skills monks would get. Mash tried following the pose in the book. While mages focused on bringing in mana, monks focused on pushing out foreign mana and improving the quality of their mana. Mash thought he understood what both were going for and thought his idea would work. Sitting cross-legged on his bed, he started meditating, trying to feel for the mana within his body. He didn't know how long it had taken him, but eventually he felt something. It was like the energy he had felt when getting his class, but somehow it felt more like him. Once he felt the mana, it changed his perception, like a sense that he had just awoken. With that sense he managed to perform the monk exercise and push out the mana that he felt earlier. It was surprisingly painful. Like pulling the hairs from his head, but instead they were within his body. He coughed roughly, it felt like he was pulling at his lungs unnaturally. He pushed through and focused on drawing mana in to fill those gaps, and the feeling passed. The new mana seemed to fill the places he had emptied earlier. The next time he completed the cycle, it went much smoother and involved only a small amount of discomfort. Apparently, that was normal though, at least according to the meditation skill. He kept repeating the process for the rest of the night. He woke up early in the morning. He didn't remember when he had fallen asleep, and he was still sitting in the posture for meditation that he had earlier. He focused in on himself, eager to check if he had made any progress last night. He didn't think it was likely, but his wisdom and intelligence weren't particularly high. Name, Mash class, Runner. Level, 1. Health, 60/60ths. Stamina, 100/100. Mana, 60/60ths. Fortitude, 6. Endurance, 10. Strength, 2. Agility, 5. Intelligence, 6. Wisdom, 5. Charisma, 1. Free stats, 2. Skills, Endure. Endure, go beyond your limits. Continue current action even after depleting stamina. Mash stood up in disbelief. His intelligence had gone up by 2 and his wisdom by 3. That was a single night of meditation and he had gained 5 stats. He wanted to scream, laugh, and dance. He felt like he wanted to explode, he needed to do something. His brother, as if he had a sixth sense for appearing at the right time, opened the door. His brother spoke quickly. Good, you're awake, we can get started immediately. Mash began his training in earnest. Underscore 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 un. 2 years later. Mash woke up by himself. It was early in the morning and none of his family members woke up this early. His brother used to wake up around the same time as him, but he left for the capital a few days ago. After getting the apprentice sentinel class, he was named as a potential hero candidate. He was more likely to end up as a sentinel than a hero, but either class was famous enough that the kingdom wouldn't risk losing him. There had been a big ceremony for his departure, with a small festival being held in the district. His brother hated every moment of it, spending most of his time with Mash since not many others would. He knew that he would be treated differently but was still surprised by the amount of people who looked at him strangely. Most faces were filled with pity, but there had been those that felt more dismissive. The other kids were horrible and either mocked or ignored Mash, and the festival had just stressed this reception. He thought that the runner class was common but learned that was not the case. Apparently, it had very specific triggers, most of which would occur without the person's knowledge. This gave the class a worse reputation, since the most known triggers were cowardly actions, hence it was dubbed a coward's class. Mash went for a run, deciding that he would take it easy today and just enjoy the run. Before he knew it, running had become one of his favorite things to do, and he would do it for most of the day. He could go anywhere in the city and enjoyed running between the parks. At this time of the day, he was one of the only people outside, which let him run freely while enjoying the city. The morning air was fresh and devoid of the odd scents that he usually expected in the city. While running he found himself looking towards the sky. He could spot some interesting birds flying in the distance and imagined himself flying, and how freeing that would be. He saw a few birds flying higher than the rest, dark shadows at the edges of the clouds. Dreaming about the ability to fly, he made his way back home. It was nearing breakfast and he was planning on relaxing today. Arriving sooner than he expected, he made his way to the kitchen. He stopped when he saw his mother, trying to leave without her noticing. So, you're taking it easy again. How many days are you going to relax for? Do you even want to change your class anymore? His mother's tone was the hardest to listen to, being a mix of disappointment and sadness. She sounded like she wanted the best for Mash but couldn't do anything to help him. She always seemed to catch him on breaks and would chastise him. She had tried to get him to work with her, but he would always refuse. Becoming a dedicated healer was not his dream and he hated having this conversation. Choosing not to respond, he grabbed the breakfast she had ready for him. She always made sure that there was food ready for breakfast and dinner. Before leaving the kitchen, he muttered a quiet thanks. Despite everything, he was sure that his family still loved him, and he did too, even if he was finding it harder to spend time with them. His class had changed his life. While his siblings didn't care, his parents had been the opposite, drastically changing the way they treated them. More and more of his encounters with his mother were ending up like that, but were usually more pleasant around celebrations. His father had been worse, and every time Mash met with him, he would grill Mash about any changes to his stats. When he had improvements, everything was fine, but when his stats stagnated, he would get a list of things to do from his father. Honestly, Mash didn't mind doing the exercises, having found it fun to improve. It felt like a game, and he was competing with his father and brother to see who would come up with the best methods to raise stats. In fact, using the endure skill made him feel incredible. It would take all of his concentration to keep the skill going, stopping his mind from thinking about how others looked at him. It pushed all the tiredness away, giving him the ability to run beyond limit, far further than anyone could know. He never told his family about how he ran to the edges of the village. Finishing the breakfast, a simple roll of bread stuffed with bits of eggs and cheese, he aimed to complete a longer run. 3 years later, Mash was running. He usually ended his workouts with a run, going until dinner came around. The endure skill would allow him to keep working on his agility and endurance even after he ran out of stamina. He would be in some pain for the rest of the day after going home, but that was a small price to pay for improving his stats. Mash felt comfortable with his routine and had even improved upon his brother's schedule after he left. Mash himself was almost 10 and would soon start working with his father to learn some of the basics in using a weapon. Mash already spent a few days at the official training grounds to observe, but usually ended up following along with the exercises. Mash wasn't quite done today, so he decided to stop by the training grounds and wait for his father to finish his work. The training grounds were plain and clean. A simple track, and a large space with some training dummies was enough for most exercises. Mash wanted to walk up to the training dummies and grab a wooden sword, but he couldn't. He still wasn't allowed to use the full wooden swords that the other trainees used, and instead ran to his usual spot by the side of the track. Next to the track there was a wall, and Mash liked working in the shade. Propped against the wall, Mash found his favorite stick. This stick was the perfect weight and length. Despite not being perfectly straight, it had grooves that fit his hands nicely. The top split into a Y shape, and Mash honestly preferred the skewed weight distribution. Currently, Mash's stamina was low, and he could easily deplete it with some practice swings, but instead he wanted to try and get his skill to work with the training motions. When swinging a sword properly, the motions just didn't flow. He had tried changing the motions as much as he could but found that it would just break his form. He had seen an adventurer using a spear and tried using those motions. He couldn't spin the stick as well as the adventurer had done with his spear, but he did manage to persist for a while after his stamina ran out. He wanted to use a sword, but decided a spear would suit him better, and there were knights that used spears, even if it wasn't common. Mash decided to check on his stats once before starting, as he did with almost every exercise now. Name: Mash. Class: Runner. Level: 5. Health: 130/130. Stamina: 210/210. Mana: 150/150. Fortitude: 13. Endurance: 21. Strength: 10. Agility: 13. Intelligence: 15. Wisdom: 11. Charisma: 6. Free stats: 10. Skills: Endure. Endure, go beyond your limits. Continue current action even after depleting stamina. Not even 5 minutes had passed when he was interrupted. Mash didn't hide while training, as there would have been little point to it anyways. Ever since getting his class, Mash had begun training and had quickly become somewhat of a spectacle as people watched the runner run. A group of boys had walked up to him, wearing the apprentice guard uniform that all those who trained here did. When Mash turned 10, he would also get a uniform and start training, but he had a late birthday, so a lot of the kids had already started. He didn't know the boys well, in fact, he had grown distant from all the other children as he devoted his time to improving his stats in some way. He was certain that by now his stats would easily beat most other children his age, even those with combat-related classes. They might beat him in a specific stat, but he doubted even that. He knew what was coming: the boys would ridicule him for one reason or another and then leave. It annoyed him that he couldn't fight them. His father hated fighting and would give Mash an earful if he did. Speaking loudly, the boy in front mocked Mash. "The coward has begun playing with sticks, has he? I think I saw dancers do this at the circus." "No, wait, it was the monkeys." Grinding his teeth, Mash resisted the urge to strike the boy. The boy wasn't done taunting him and continued beyond his usual point. "I wonder if I can do that too." The boy was speaking while reaching for Mash's weapon. That was not something Mash was willing to relinquish to bully, and he stooped to his level and mocked him. "Monkey see, monkey do." Mash said the words without thinking as he pulled the stick back out of reach. One of the others had to stifle a chuckle. Mash thought that was stupid, it wasn't even funny. He just responded out of anger. Face red and hands waving, the boy screamed out his demand. "Fight me, I challenge you." The word spread across the grounds, and the knights started gathering to watch the children make fools of themselves. "Fine." Mash made sure to say the words loud enough so that everyone could hear. He would not be a coward, not here, not now. His class did not define him. He knew his father would be angry, but that was better than acting like a coward. Mash distanced himself from the boy, and began wielding the stick as a spear, using the forked end as the head. The boy drew his wooden sword. It was a standard longsword type and he held it crudely, not at all like Mash's father or brother would have. The knights around had formed a small circle. It gave them ample room for the fight. One of the knights yelled, "Begin." The boy exploded into motion, charging at Mash, raising his sword up for an obvious overhead swing. Mash lashed out with his spear while ducking to the left. He was aiming to jab the boy in the throat, to end the fight as quickly as possible. He wasn't an expert and aimed at the obvious weak points with generic motions that even he could perform. The boy, however, was carried by the weight of his own sword, his swing dragging his whole body down. His head followed the swing like an amateur. Mash hadn't been ready for this. He watched as one end of the stick plunged into the boy's eye. Time seemed to slow down as Mash watched the motion. The boy's eye got crushed and seemed to pop into a mixture of blood and gore. Mash couldn't stop his motion either and ended up pushing the stick further in. He felt some resistance which he thought must be the boy's skull, but it didn't stop the motion completely. However, it did strain the stick, and as it couldn't take the full weight of the boy and Mash's thrust, it snapped. The boy fell face first into the dirt. The sound of his head smacking into the ground left a sickening crunch, as the stick was driven further into his head. The boy stopped moving and blood pooled around his head as silence filled the grounds, and Mash knew that the boy was dead. Then it came, the rush as Mash leveled, a feeling that he had previously only experienced on his birthday. Name, Mash class, Runner. Level, 6. Health, 140/140. Stamina, 220/220. Mana, 160/160. Fortitude, 14. Endurance, 22. Strength, 11. Agility, 14. Intelligence, 16. Wisdom, 12. Charisma, 6. Free stats, 12. Skills, Endure. Endure, go beyond your limits. Continue current action even after depleting stamina. Chapter 3, Food for Thought. Mash stared at the dead body, unable to understand what just happened. It was an accident, he hadn't meant to kill the boy. It was a single attack, with a weapon that shouldn't even have been able to kill anyone. It was just a stick, better suited to act as a cane than a weapon. Staring at its broken pieces, he realized it was fine, soon he would be able to use practice weapons like the other kids. Though he didn't feel like it was an accident. He had been aiming for the boy's neck, which was unlikely to kill him, but would have ended the fight quickly. Although, he knew that he could have, just as easily, aimed for the boy's wrist. Ending the fight by disarming him would have been just as simple, and he didn't know why he hadn't. He didn't feel like he was vindictive, he didn't even feel particularly angry with the boy. There was a bit of anger, but it was directed towards the knight. As he was contemplating why he had aimed for such a vital location, he realized that he currently didn't feel anything for the boy. There was no joy or regret. Despite killing the boy, he didn't care much. Thinking on it now, he didn't even know who the boy was. He didn't know his name. Recognizing the boy's face, he thought on his last encounter with the boy. In the past, the boy had approached Mash plenty, but he could remember one moment vividly. It was a while ago when he was at his favorite park. It's where he usually went to train and do exercises. After lunch he went for a run before stopping at the park. He let himself fall unconscious there since nobody ever entered it. It wasn't very big and was just a small field with a shallow pond in the middle. Dragonflies would buzz about the park, so most people avoided it. People foolishly believing that they were sacred or dangerous. They were called dragonflies after all. That day though, he was interrupted by 3 other kids. They had intruded on his territory, but he heard them before they entered. He woke quickly, getting up to face the newcomers. Most people tended to avoid him, and he hoped that they would leave once they saw him. They didn't though, taunting him when they saw him. He remembered the boys calling him a coward. Refusing to back down, he had raised his weapon to fight the boy. The boy was more prepared though, carrying a training sword on his waist. He wasn't supposed to be allowed to do that, meaning that his father had given it to him. Mash's father would never break the rules though, so all he had was a stick. That didn't make him back down though, he had been using the stick for a while now and believed it could handle a few attacks from the boy. Trying to get the jump on the boy, he took the initiative and attacked first. Swinging his weapon at the boy's side, it met with his own sword. The boy having used a skill to move unnaturally quickly, Mash could tell from the slight glow that came from the sword. His stick shattered from the blow, not able to stop the blow in the slightest. It hit his arm, and he felt a sharp pain shoot up his arm. Losing his weapon, he did the one thing he knew he could beat the boy at and ran away. They couldn't catch him, but he heard the word coward clearly. It cut through him, and he felt tears falling from his eyes. The worst part of that encounter had been the truth in the boy's words. It was after that encounter that he stopped running away, regardless of who he was fighting or what he was carrying. Only now did he realize that they were the same people, and the boy from then was the one he killed. Mash had never bothered learning anything about the boy. Having been preoccupied with raising his stats, he hadn't spent much time with the other kids, and at some point, he found that he couldn't connect with other people. They reminded Mash of someone he could have been, but no longer wanted to be. He stared at the body before him, realizing suddenly that he didn't regret his actions. It was such a small thing compared to what he had gained. He would get his job advancement a year earlier and could even be offered a class for defeating someone who was a higher level than him, not to mention the improvement to his stats. The improvements made him feel reassured, and for the first time it felt unnatural. Since when did improving become so important to him? He knew why he kept going, but he didn't used to feel like this. It didn't really feel like his own thoughts at first, but the longer he dwelled on it the more it felt familiar. Of course, he would feel better about improving, that was common sense. It was also the only way that he could be with his siblings. His brother had already left for the capital and his would certainly follow. If he wanted to be with them, he would need to get a much better class, and training had been the solution. When he thought of his siblings, he realized some the severity of his actions. Though, this strange lack of feeling at killing the boy made him hesitate slightly. Shouldn't he feel something? Had he changed or had he always been like this? What would his siblings think? Mash's thoughts returned to the scene before him. He had been spacing out after realizing that he had leveled. Having gained a decent number of stats as well, it seemed like fights, or maybe kills, were more likely to raise someone's stats. He watched as some of the knights ran up to the boy, a few pointedly standing between himself and the boy. Unable to understand their actions, it's not like the boy was going to get more dead, he tried to find someone to blame. That line of thinking felt both right and wrong to him. This whole thing just felt so pointless. The boy had died before being able to live his life, all because of some stupid arrogance. The knights foolishly let them fight, and had been unprepared to step in. He wanted to glare at them but noticed movement among the crowd. Some of the knights had parted to let some people through, one of which was his father. He didn't know the other 2 that had followed them, but one of them wore the robes of a healer. The healer couldn't do anything at this point. The boy was dead, he had already gained the experience. He doubted that would have happened if the boy could be revived. Not entirely sure what was going to happen, he just stared at the group as they approached. Mash had been growing distant from his parents over the last couple of years. They hadn't kept acting disappointed, rather they had acted like hopeful, burdening him with their expectations. It reminded him of the past, and how his own expectations had disappointed him when he got the runner class. Never feeling like there was a resolution with his parents, he found that he didn't want to spend as much time around them anymore. He didn't blame them for not knowing how he felt and would never tell them. Honestly, he didn't want to burden them anymore, wanting to grow up without them. At least that's what he told himself. Underscore 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 un. Father's P.O.V. The scene before him was chaos. The professionally trained knights and guards had gathered up in a circle, most of them were panicking rather than acting like they should. Some stood stone-faced, clearly still shocked by the sudden events. There, in the center of the gathered crowd, were 4 boys. He had heard his son was involved but had not realized what the exact situation was. One glance over the state of the boys told him everything. Having told Mash to never fight while on the night grounds, he had gone against his specific instructions in fighting the boy. Mash had been getting into fights more often as of late, especially with kids far older than himself. Honestly, it filled him with pride whenever Mash won a fight, knowing that his son was improving and had a bright future. He knew that his relationship with his son wasn't the best, but at least he had expected him to listen. Mash had been good about his training, and he thought it would translate to everything else. Giving Mash instructions was difficult though, he wouldn't listen and always tried to do more. Honestly, seeing that his son was steadily growing in strength had significantly improved his perception of him. Wanting to mend ties between them, he tried to spend more time with his son but that only seemed to make their relationship worse. He was growing up unnaturally fast, probably a result of his abnormal stat growth. Looking at him now, he felt proud of his son. He wanted to go to Mash, and provide him with some comfort, but looking at Mash's face he realized that Mash looked normal, like he didn't need it. Mash looked as though nothing had happened. He had seen shock before, being a military leader would do that, but Mash's face showed no signs of shock. It reminded him of people with criminal or killer classes, like an assassin. Looking at the other boy, he found what he had expected. One of the forks of the stick was lodged deep into the boy's head. He was dead, that much was certain. For an instant, he wondered if Mash had intentionally killed the boy, but cursed himself for the thought. Mash worked hard over the past couple of years and deserved some of his trust now. Mash fought the boy to demonstrate his strength, to teach the kid a lesson. That was all right, most of the knights here would even agree with him. It was only because one of them died that Mash would find himself in trouble. Before he could get closer to Mash, he heard the man next to him scream. Jason! The word came out in a surprisingly high-pitched screech. It was a bellow that could be felt through the ground. He had never seen his co-worker in so much distress before. General Russell almost always looked like he was ready for a fight. A glare had been fixed on his face for as long as he had known the man, but now he broke into a crying mess as he held his boy's lifeless body. The healer had already realized it was too late but checked anyways. He didn't have the power to revive people but could heal the boy if there was even the tiniest trickle of life. They wouldn't be that lucky it seemed. As the healer shook his head in defeat, the tension from the group had shifted. Of course, Mash would kill the general's son, his life would never be easy. He could feel the anger radiating off Russell and decided to shift slightly to cover Mash. Mash was close to securing his own freedom, to gaining a powerful class. It was up to him to protect his son until he could protect himself. Not missing the motion, Russell glared daggers at Mash, speaking before anyone could react. You were the one who killed Jason. It wasn't a question, a mere statement, or maybe a judgment. Russell might as well have been breathing fire for all the anger laced within his words. Jason, hey. His son seemed to be ignoring the tension completely, instead speaking calmly, but Russell interrupted him before he could get another word out. Underscore 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 un. Mash P.O.V. Mash looked at the scene before him more confused than anything. So that was the general's son. How was he so weak? Mash had heard that the general's son was a knight's apprentice, he should have been far stronger than Mash. He probably even had a combat-related skill of some kind, but he was so pathetic. Mash looked at the crying man hold his son for another second before finally looking at his father. His father had been looking back at Mash. When their eyes met, Mash saw the pain in his father's face. Or was that disgust? The look lasted only a moment. Then his father turned away, moving his sight back to the general on the ground and shifted slightly closer to Mash. The motion reminded Mash of his father's disappointment, so he directed his gaze to the group of knights around him. Some looked confused, but by now most were looking at him. They had a multitude of expression. Many looked disgusted and a few seemed to be angry. He even noticed the occasional concerned face among the crowd. Everyone, though, saw Mash as the killer, finding someone whom they could blame. That much was obvious. As Mash investigated the faces of the knights before him, did he even begin to feel that something had changed? He was not sad or regretful. Instead, he felt wrong and a little disgusted. He could tell that he wasn't feeling that way about himself, rather because of the situation in front of him. He hadn't done anything wrong. The fight was fair, and Mash won because he was deserving. The boy had lost because he wasted his potential despite being given a much better class. Mash felt something there, a better understanding of the wrongness from earlier. Then he noticed it. It felt like he had been hit over the head, as the realization dawned on him. The boy's class simply wasn't better. Mash's class had been made for catching up. The runner was literally meant to close gaps. Even after he won the fight, he still treated the boy's class as being above his, but that didn't make any sense to him now. Why was everyone so adamant about knights and heroes being such superior classes? Sure, they gave a decent number of stats, but any class could gain stats early by working hard. In fact, most people spent their youth doing just that. That was what most people did when they wanted to improve or change their class, although that was typically commoners. Everything fell into place then. The class never really mattered, it was just a means to gain skills and levels. The name, and even the stats to some extent, were mostly irrelevant. Mash remembered scouring his book and seeing how a lot of advanced classes would give highly unique skills. It never tiered one class above another, and almost always mentioned use cases for the skills listed. After spending so long focused on his stats, he had thought that was the most important aspect for classes. Everyone he knew judged classes by the number of stats you gained from the class. Mash just couldn't figure out why. Sure, stats were good, but Mash was certain some classes would be able to ignore a simple difference in strength or dexterity. So why did people insist that classes be defined like that? Mash kept trying to come up with a reason, but continually seemed to be running around the answer. You were the one who killed Jason. The words were spoken so loudly that they broke Mash from his train of thoughts. He realized that he was looking at the general, and that the man was speaking to him. He thought about what the man had said. Jason, hey. Mash only realized he had spoken once he saw the man's face darken further. He was honestly surprised the general could squeeze more emotion into his face. It took a second, but Mash realized what he had just said. He panicked then, looking around trying to find a way out. When he couldn't find one, his eyes settled on his father. Mash hoped that his father would do something, but he just wore a helpless expression. Detain him. Mash could hear the words ring in his head and thought that the general must have used a skill. The knights immediately moved to capture Mash, that finally seemed to shake his father out of his stupor. Russell, don't you think you should see? His father couldn't even get the words out. Calm down. Your boy killed my son without even knowing his name. His name. The last few words had coming out much louder than the rest. He was yelling at this point and Mash began to think that he would draw his blade. By now Mash was firmly within the grasp of the knights and wouldn't be able to defend himself even if he wanted. Lingering on his previous thoughts, he felt like he was close to something but couldn't put his finger on what. When the general's hand fell to his pommel, the panic set in. All the emotion he had been lacking before revealing itself now. It was raging far beyond normal, even more than he thought he could muster. Changing from feeling nothing to extreme panic, shook Mash's mind, making it harder to focus. He didn't want to die. Not now. Feeling his body tense up even before the sword came his way, he held his stomach to stop himself from throwing up and realized it was becoming harder to breathe. When he noticed the knights loosen their grips, he was tempted to run. Apparently, he was staring at the ground because this gesture had made him lift his head. Wanting to see what changed, he looked to the general, noticing that the general didn't seem as angry as before. His father managing to calm him down. Mash tried to look at the knights but realized that his vision was getting blurry. He was crying. When did he start crying? Was he that much of a coward that he couldn't face the consequences of his own actions? That thought sickened Mash more than anything else. He would not be a coward. It was that thought that made him throw up. Take him to the dungeons. We will handle his judgment later. The general seemed to have gathered his composure and spoke the words with the authority that Mash would expect from a general. Giving it a tiny amount of his attention as he tried to regain control of his stomach, he watched as the knights opened around the group. His father looked like he wanted to protest but refrained after sharing a look with the general, and the knights moved immediately, leading Mash to the dungeons. He went to the training grounds often, but never actually went to the fort itself. He was not allowed to go inside, so never bothered trying. Now though, he was let in through a set of back doors that he had never noticed before. As they entered the building, Mash realized that the fort was made of crystal. Originally, he thought it was made of stone, but once inside he could see how the light passed through some sections of the wall. Gasping a little, he was led down a set of stairs and realized the walls, floors, and ceilings were covered in intricate rune work. Was this whole fort one enormous mana crystal? What enchantments would even require a crystal this large? Mash was flooded with questions, but those quickly died as he realized where the dungeons were. The dungeons, he seemed to be going to, were entirely separate from the fort itself. It seemed to have been dug into the dirt and had none of the awe that the main fort had. No crystal or engravings along the walls, just simple stone cells. There was no light source. One of the knights, having grabbed a candle, lit them as they went further into the dungeon. Mash's room was simple. More a pen for animals than humans. It had a single hole in the corner to use as the bathroom and a slightly elevated mound of dirt with a simple blanket to act as the bed. The knights reassured him that he would only be here for a short time and left. Then Mash was left alone in the cell. As the knights got further away, the darkness swelled till there was nothing left but his thoughts. Well, he did have a lot to think about. He didn't know what to do with his time at first, just lying on the bed, as he tried to fall asleep. It didn't come, and he found himself sitting and staring into the darkness. Instead, he tried meditating, finding it surprisingly easy to feel the mana around him. The fort seemed to make the mana thicker, and his meditation felt more beneficial than normal. It took more of his attention, letting him forget about where he was. Feeling a little gratification at the meditations, he checked his stats regularly, watching when his wisdom stat rose. It happened so quickly, or at least he thought it had been quick, but couldn't tell. Ever since he started training and saw improvements, he felt driven to work harder. It became a necessity. Improving was the only thing his class did, and he wanted to make the most of it. Chapter 4, Stats vs Skills. Mash had been in the cell for far longer than was reasonable. He believed that it had been around 5 days but couldn't really tell exactly. There were no lights or any other ways for Mash to keep track of the day. He could only tell by counting the number of meals he had received so far. The food wasn't as good as back home, but easily better than he had expected. The meals seemed to be well balanced and usually contained a meat of some kind. He knew that at least 3 days had passed though, as he had leveled again for his birthday. He had spent his birthday alone, and in the dark. He was a little sad for missing it, but worried a lot more for his sister. Mash believed that the general was keeping him intentionally and hoped that his father would manage to get him out. He didn't want to consider any other alternatives, as those would mean a much longer stay. He hadn't been wasting his time though. The cell was big enough for some of his exercises, and the quiet had made meditation relatively easy. He even managed to practice some spear motions, although he couldn't get it perfect without an actual spear. His stats had improved since he got down here, especially his mental stats. He had spent far more time meditating, as it also let him sort through some of his thoughts. He had come close to grasping something important after killing Jason. He had begun to realize the fundamental nature of classes, but it was incomplete. He had been stopped moments from realizing how classes were made. A person could get a class that would fit only them. The hero Arthur, for example, had the class Arthur the Hero. Since getting so close, Mash had tried addressing the subject in many different lights. If he could figure out how to pick and choose classes, he could easily become one of the strongest people ever. When someone got a new class, their old skills would remain, and in most cases evolve and adapt to the new class. Even though he didn't crack the code, he did realize that he needed to get a better grasp of mana. A magic skill, of any kind, would be vital to his class and future. On top of that, he decided that he no longer wanted to be a knight or guard or even a sentinel. While those classes weren't bad, Mash knew that they were not right for him. They offered a wide variety of skills and increased a person's stats drastically. The class was useful, but Mash now believed the more specific a class the better. The smaller the scope of a skill was, the more dramatically it improved a person's control over that skill. Endure, for example, was a poor skill because its effect was extremely open-ended. Mash was practically forced to find a fighting style that would specifically work within the restrictions of the skill. That was, of course, if he wanted to use it properly. It wasn't all bad though. The generality of the skill meant that he could use it to cover a wide range of tasks. Since the skill could cover all his stamina needs, Mash decided that it would be better to focus on his magical stats. He wanted to go into a specific mage class, like an ice mage or a fire mage. While that would narrow his abilities a lot, it would enable him to utilize his one skill to cover the weaknesses of an otherwise narrow class. With that in mind, he continued his meditations. With each of his breaths, he was trying to pull in mana more directly. He couldn't connect with the mana because he didn't have a class that granted him the mana manipulation skill. However, he thought that he had noticed a difference with his increasing stats. Perhaps his body had begun adjusting for the classes he would get in the future, or maybe it was just in his head. Maybe, he just wanted to believe that he was gaining something while down here. His stat improvement was nice, but he knew now that using them was more important than gaining them. He decided to check his stats anyways, to see where he was. Name, Mash class, Runner. Level, 7. Health, 160/160. Stamina, 240/240. Mana, 180/180. Fortitude, 16. Endurance, 24. Strength, 12. Agility, 15. Intelligence, 18. Wisdom, 18. Charisma, 7. Free stats, 14. Skills, Endure. Endure, go beyond your limits. Continue current action even after depleting stamina. He was doing well. He hadn't really known how his charisma had gone up, but that was a small change compared to the improvement in his wisdom and intelligence. Spending most of his time meditating was showing results, although, it had already started to plateau. His intelligence hadn't gone up in a while. It had gone up soon after he had leveled but had not risen since then, and now his wisdom had caught up too. He wondered if maybe there was a more physical reason for his block. Perhaps his class itself was blocking his mental stats from rising higher. If he was going to be locked in a cell, he wanted to make sure he was still making progress. He would meditate until after dinner, and if nothing changed, he might have to consider something else. Dinner came and went. It was a stew that had thick chunks of beef and chicken inside. The entire thing felt soft in his mouth, the meat having stewed for a while. Mash had realized that he was always the last person to receive his serving, and it usually came out cold. Today though it was still hot, they had probably left the stew on the fire, and that warmth felt good. His stats though, hadn't changed. He wasn't feeling like he was making any progress. Not with his meditation, and not with his understanding of classes. There was a solution that he thought of earlier. He could use the free stats that he had been hoarding so far to power through his blockages. Perhaps a higher intelligence and wisdom would let him figure out something new. It would also set him up for receiving a magical class. Most people would wait till the last minute and raise their stats to try and get specific skills in the class that they wanted. Mash couldn't wait though. If he was stuck in here without making any progress, he thought he would lose his mind. It was the only thing that he could even see consistently and didn't want it to stagnate. He had made his decision and allocated his free stats to his intelligence and wisdom. His endurance would be an interesting choice too, but its growth had barely slowed down. Name, Mash class, Runner. Level, 7. Health, 160/160. Stamina, 240/240. Mana, 300/300. Fortitude, 16. Endurance, 24. Strength, 12. Agility, 15. Intelligence, 30. Wisdom, 20. Charisma, 7. Free stats, 0. Skills, Endure. Endure, go beyond your limits. Continue current action even after depleting stamina. Mash immediately felt different. He knew that people with high intelligence and wisdom tended to act more mature, but now he understood why. His actions from a couple days ago seemed foolish. Even now some of his thoughts felt inept, like they were too simple to be his own. He knew now why he had grown more distant with his father, why they had started treating him differently. His stats were making him grow. He matured faster, both physically and mentally. It was an obvious result of gaining stats beyond what most children had. His mental stats were stalling because those were supposed to be the limits of children, in fact that was why many of his stats had slowed. His endurance though wouldn't affect his body directly, which was why it kept growing. He was connecting the dots that he would never have noticed if he didn't raise his intelligence and wisdom. Mash guessed that the real reason kids were told not to use their free stats was so that they would remain children. Mash had to wonder if his brother had done the same thing, maybe his sister did too. They always felt smarter than the other kids, or maybe Mash was putting them on a pedestal. Mash felt a lot better, he was literally not the same person he was a few moments ago. Those plateaus, that had seemed so large, were far beneath him now. He felt like his meditations would be more worthwhile too, and he was already coming up with new ways to improve his other stats. He would raise them to 20 as fast as he could, hoping that that was the natural limit of all stats. He was about to ignore charisma but managed to come up with some ways to improve even that. His determination was reignited as the path became clear to him. He would unblock all his stats, but that was just the first step. He had realized one of the things he had missed earlier. Most skills just let you do things you could do with training, some more easily than others. Meditation was the perfect example, he had been doing it for years even though he didn't have the actual skill for it. He was determined to touch mana by the time he got out of the cell, he didn't know if he could cast magic but had already begun to get a feel for mana. He thought that he might even be able to touch it directly. So, his days went on, stuck within a cell and caring less and less about how much time had passed. He had honestly accomplished a lot in his imprisonment, breaking through some of the restrictions his age had placed on his stats. Sadly, he used up his free stats so he couldn't raise his fortitude beyond its limitation. He had even managed to touch the ambient mana once. He didn't connect with it like a mage would have but managed to push it slightly. It wouldn't do much but was the first time he ever used any mana. It had felt liberating, as though he had finally broken through his bonds. He knew the irony in feeling that way while he was stuck in a cell, but didn't care. It really felt as though he had removed a collar that he never noticed before. Now he could gently push and pull at the mana around him, he couldn't wait to see what his next class would be. He thought again on his stats to bask in the feeling of progress. Name, Mash class, Runner. Level, 7. Health, 160/160. Stamina, 270/270. Mana, 310/310. Fortitude, 16. Endurance, 27. Strength, 14. Agility, 16. Intelligence, 31. Wisdom, 21. Charisma, 8. Free stats, 0. Skills, Endure. Endure, go beyond your limits. Continue current action even after depleting stamina. He was finally released. It had happened suddenly. The guards came at the usual time, when they typically brought lunch, but instead, had come to let him out. They looked conflicted as they let Mash out though. There were 2 of them this time too. Usually only one would come. The one unlocking the cell spoke. It is time for your sentencing. The guards sounded strangely sympathetic. The obvious concern in their voice was making him worry. Would he be killed? The question passed through his mind like an arrow, but he decided that was probably not the case. He would be shackled or something if they were planning on killing him. Shaking his head slightly, he asked the first question that came to his mind. How long have I been in there? Mash hoped they would answer the unasked question and explain why he had been trapped for so long. They didn't. 2 weeks, it is the 23rd day of the 13th month. Now be quiet. Mash was about to ask another question but stopped realizing why they had told him to be quiet. They were about to enter the fort proper again and would certainly be surrounded by knights. Mash had oddly grown closer to the 2 guards who had overseen him. They were the only ones he could talk to, and they would often share a conversation with him while he ate. The one who had spoken was Albert, and the other was Stephen. They were rookies, about the same age as his brother, and each had the knight class. They would most likely head to the capital at some point too, but for now were stuck with whatever duty was easiest. They had complained about the mindless chores that they were instructed to do. They were grateful that monitoring Mash had gotten them out of their routine. The fort was like he remembered, but now there was a group of knights lining the walls leading him to the ruler's throne room. This city was not an independent kingdom and was instead ruled by Duke Galam. He was a powerful ice mage and had become a duke after slaying a wyvern. It was as close as one could ever get to slaying a dragon. Actual dragons were basically gods and could easily destroy the whole kingdom. The duke's throne room didn't have a real throne since he was not an actual king. Instead, the room was a large empty circle with a table that filled half the perimeter of the room. The Duke's seat was at the center of the arch, and knights filled all the other seats around the table, 3 on either side of him. He saw his father and the general from earlier. There were 4 others whom he didn't recognize. He examined their faces, realizing they all looked tired, haggard even. What happened? The words slipped past Mash's mouth like a gust of wind. He really needed to get better at keeping his mouth shut. It seemed that merely raising his stats wasn't going to improve his self-control. Everyone in the room was now definitely paying attention to him. Did they actually forget about him? Did they just leave him in a cell because of inconvenience? Mash was slowly getting angrier and was about to scream, but the Duke's words cut through his rage like a sharpened sword. There was an attack. Chapter 5, Goodbyes. There was an attack. The Duke's words reverberated in the room. The echoing effect had frozen Mash, stopping all his anger. The Duke hadn't continued, instead just looking at Mash, as if waiting for his response. Mash could only formulate a single question. He didn't even have enough time to process the information. Who? He had stuttered while asking the one-word question. He cursed himself for sounding so pathetic. Although, he knew that any big attacks were likely to cause a lot of damage. The kingdom was large enough that an attack here meant that it had already passed a few of the outer towns. The Duke spoke solemnly now. A troll tribe had been invading the territories. They had somehow avoided the outer towns and struck our city with full force. We had been able to evacuate most civilians, but there was a large amount of collateral damage. Not to mention we are still getting occasional reports on goblins and other vermin. They had snuck in during the battle and have infested the outskirts of the city. Mash understood now. He had been forgotten because they just had more important shit to deal with. This made sense to him, but it still made him angry. They should have just let him go. He wanted to blame them, but with his newfound mental stats thought better of it. They were still the ones to decide his punishment, and yelling at them wouldn't change anything. A question did pop into his head though. Why tell me? He did get that there was an attack, but the Duke didn't have to justify anything to him. Neither did it matter for whatever punishment he would receive. He would either be imprisoned longer or executed. Unless they were lenient for some reason. Because the punishment that we have decided for you will involve helping with the city's reconstruction. I thought it wise to inform you what you're working for. I hope that you will be happier doing work that is good for your home. Do your job well, and you will be able to prove your own character. One last thing, I am sorry for keeping you imprisoned, it was not what you deserved. Mash heard the general scoff and could guess why he had been held for so long. He didn't care much though, the general had no idea how much he had gained in that cell. The Duke had apologized to him too. He would have thought that the Duke would be more callous, but instead seemed to hold himself to a better standard than those around him. Mash thought that he liked the man, even though the man had assigned him a punishment. So, he would help with the reconstruction effort, that honestly sounded pretty good to him. He didn't really want to face his family and thought it would give him a good excuse to get out of the house. It would certainly be a lot of work, but that was nothing new to him. It would probably feel good to be out in the sun after having been locked up for so long. Mash nodded his head and gave his thanks. Thank you, sir. I will make sure to do the work to the best of my ability. He had said the words with resolve and tried to lace his words with as much excitement as he could muster. He wanted the general to know how happy he felt, even if it was just petty revenge. He would take whatever victories he could get. Mash left the fort soon and was returning home with his father, after the meeting had concluded. The Duke hadn't said much, except to inform Mash that he would start tomorrow. He would have to meet with one of the reconstruction crews before the sun even rose. It was early, but not as early as he normally woke up for his exercises. He would rather go there now than go home to face his mother and sister. He was really only worried about how his sister would react, he didn't want to see her face. He came home to a surprising sight, and it comforted him. His mother and sister were waiting for him to return, surprising him with a warm welcome as he opened the door. His sister was somehow smiling and crying at the same time, and she immediately hugged him. She spoke through her sniffles. Happy BB birthday. She had struggled to get the words out. Mash hugged her back, realizing for the first time that he had missed his family. He was crying now too, happy to be back home. It wasn't just his sister either, he was glad to be back with his parents too. Mash took the effort to look at them again, scared to see their faces. However, they were both smiling down at him. Mash felt strangely warm, he had expected the worst from them. It was strange, they were treating him like they had before he got his class. A thought flashed through his mind, unbidden and unwanted, but it had felt like it struck true. Were his parents only treating him well because they noticed that Mash would probably get a good class? Anyone could have figured out that he was on track to receive a powerful class. He easily beat a kid with the Knight Apprentice class. Whatever he got would probably be useful, and it was clear that he was talented. The thought stuck in his mind, clinging to him like a leech. He started feeling sick. It took him real effort to push the feeling down, and just accept his parents' kindness. They had set up a small party for him. The city had apparently been sparing with vegetables, as many of the fields had been burned. There was a decent variety of meat since hunters were still able to find monsters, but only a few pieces of bread. The only vegetables on the table were a single dish of beans, and another of mashed potatoes. It wasn't the fanciest meal he had ever had, but it had certainly been better than the food from the cells. It also tasted familiar, and he finally felt like he could relax. He didn't feel like he needed to distract himself from his situation. There were no presents though. With all the craziness they hadn't had the opportunity to buy him one and chose to give him money instead. They had given him a single gold coin. It was the most money he had ever held, and it could easily get him whatever he wanted. He could even get a proper training weapon with that much money. He was tempted but decided to save it instead. The party had gone well, but Mash was ready to sleep. He would have a proper bed and was excited to use it. He went to bed early so that he would have over 10 hours of sleep. Before he entered his room, his sister approached him giving him a second present. It was a single piece of chocolate. It was wrapped in some sturdy paper. She had placed it in his hand before heading to bed herself. He stared at it in awe. Chocolate was rare and expensive. This one piece would cost a handful of gold. You couldn't even find a seller within the city. It all had to be imported, so the Duke was normally the only one who could get his hands on it. He wanted to ask her where she got it. He even considered selling it for a second but decided he would eat it. He bet that this was her only piece and wouldn't waste a gift like that. He was about to go and offer her half but realized that was probably why she had rushed to bed. He slowly put the piece into his mouth. It was so sweet that he almost spit it out. After the surprise had passed, he realized how much he liked it. It was one of the best things he had ever had. He stopped chewing it, instead just letting it melt onto his tongue. He wanted to savor the flavors for as long as he could, dragging it out by letting it linger. It was still gone too fast. Thanks. He said the word for his sister, even though she couldn't hear them. He just felt like he needed to say the words anyways. He went to bed, ready to finally get a good night's rest. Instead, he just ended up laying there awake, unable to push aside his thoughts. His family cared for him, but they didn't know him anymore. They didn't know how he thought. They wouldn't understand why he didn't care about killing the boy. He didn't care about killing someone and doubted that he ever would. His family couldn't understand him. They were healers and knights, classes that were literally meant to save lives. Mash knew he didn't belong with them. He needed to leave. He still loved them but knew he couldn't stay. It wouldn't work, and Mash knew that better than anyone. That knowledge was a curse. He now fully understood why kids were told not to use their free stats. This had been a welcoming party, but now it felt more like a grand farewell. Mash knew that he would have to leave them. With that last thought, he felt a burden lift from his shoulders, and found sleep eagerly waiting to claim him. Underscore 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 un. He woke up early in the morning. The sun wasn't even out, but he still had work to do. He had been assigned to reconstruction work almost 4 years ago, now. The punishment had long since passed, but Mash had continued to work. He found that it was a good way to stay away from home. His sister had noticed him growing distant and had stubbornly tried to pull him back, but she also had to leave for the capital. When she turned 15, she had become a priestess and was escorted to the capital to join the main church. The entire military had been mobilized to move her there. Mash had started calling her princess when he noticed how important she had become. He understood why. She had become a priestess for the goddess of the night and no kingdom in the world would risk offending a god. People believed that they were the only reason greater beings like dragons left humans alone. Mash doubted it. From what he heard about dragons, they wouldn't care about a goddess protection. Mash too was planning on leaving town as soon as he could. He would turn 14 in a few days and would get his class advancement. Despite not being an adult, he could still become an adventurer. If he could form or join a team, he would be able to leave without being an adult himself. He wanted to leave. This town had stopped feeling like a home as soon as his sister had left. His parents were treating him fine now, but it was everyone else that had bothered him. The general hadn't physically confronted Mash, but everyone seemed to have found out that Mash had killed his son. Mash didn't really care about how others chose to look at him, but it had made finding work difficult. The general had gotten him banned from the fort grounds and had also stopped blacksmiths from selling him a proper weapon. Mash just needed to move on, but wouldn't mind getting his revenge. He only had one real plan for accomplishing that. He would leave and become so strong that he could just waltz into town and kill him. It wasn't a great plan but did also get him out of town. Contemplating his revenge, he headed to work while going over his stats. Name, Mash class, Runner. Level, 10. Health, 200/200. Stamina, 350/350. Mana, 340/340. Fortitude, 20. Endurance, 35. Strength, 22. Agility, 24. Intelligence, 34. Wisdom, 28. Charisma, 16. Free stats, 0. Skills, Endure. Endure, go beyond your limits. Continue current action even after depleting stamina. His stats were good. He knew they were a lot higher than the average for his age. Even his charisma had risen dramatically. His muscle and newfound height had done a lot for him. He was easily taller than his sister and had even outgrown the other boys who were a year or two older than him. He was tall and had some visible lean muscle on his body, together it had struck a rather imposing figure. He hadn't stopped training either. Many people had seen him practicing with his sticks. Since he was banned from the blacksmiths, he had chosen to continue to use sticks. He did it to mock the general's pettiness and remind him of his son's death. He had grown deadly with his spinning style, confident in using it endlessly. He still hadn't come up with a name for his fighting style, but didn't think it should matter, as it had no proper forms or attacks. It just involved continuously moving, making a fight into a single prolonged motion. He had designed it specifically for his endurance skill, and with his improved mana control had made even the stick into a proper weapon. He would easily be able to win all of his fights by just outlasting his opponents. He never directly attacked anyone but would make sure to show them that he could. People had noticed, and his ferocity had scared those around him. His parents had received more than a few complaints about him. He learned that charisma was a stat that rose with intimidation, and that was something he could work with. Mash was on his way to work, when he heard some very distinct yelling. The Reconstruction effort had finally made its way to the outskirts and Mash had seen soldiers fighting goblins over the past few years. Normally he would just move on, but the voice had halted him. He could recognize the voice in any situations, it was the general. He would have just moved on but had felt strangely compelled to follow the voice. It led him to a merchant building. He slid to the floor by one of the windows. As he got closer, he realized that the voices were coming from below. He peeked through the window. The building was fairly large, but he did catch a glimpse of the basement through a hole on the ground floor. The scene before him was about what he had expected. The general and a group of 4 apprentices had surrounded a small goblin camp. The soldiers looked normal enough wearing the usual set of armor that the guards received. The general's armor was a bit more embellished, and he wore a medal that he claimed to have received from the king. He couldn't fully see how many goblins there were, but he counted 7 of them. Most just carried a wooden shield, and short spear. It only had stone at the head, but goblins were born with a skill that let them penetrate armor. That was how they managed to hunt larger creatures. They were nasty-looking things, with green skin and bulbous protrusions across their body. They were disgusting creatures that oozed filth and gunk. It wasn't enough to pose a serious threat to the group, so Mash got up and dusted himself off. Turning to leave he noticed that the neighboring building looked like it was ready to collapse. A wicked thought flashed through his mind, he might be able to get his revenge after all. Mash smiled as he heard the fight below start. Chapter 6, Goblins and Class Selections. Mash walked across the alley and looked through the window of the new building. It was a tall narrow building that was starting to lean to the side. He noticed that the walls and floors were scorched. That was evidence enough that the building would collapse soon. He was confident that with a few determined pushes he could probably topple the building. He wasn't certain if this building would be enough to collapse the merchant one with the general inside. After gauging the height, a little bit more, he thought that it would probably work. He could probably get away even if it failed. He paused, wondering if this was something that he wanted to go through with. Did he want to kill the general? What about the other boys in the building? He decided that he didn't care. That was it. Now that he had the opportunity to kill the general, he wasn't sure if he should take it. It wasn't regret or empathy, rather, it was the knowledge that it wouldn't change anything. Killing the general wouldn't change people's perceptions, it wouldn't give him access to the blacksmiths, it would only serve to make things more complicated. Then he remembered something, a scene from a few years ago. After Jason had died, the stream of people that approached him grew for a while. Many people wanting a fight, some just to throw insults. He didn't let it bother him and would win almost every fight that he got into. He only lost against older kids now, those who were already 15 years old and got a new class. That day had been slightly different. He was approached by a group of 3 kids, 2 were his age but 1 was 2 years younger. His stats were beyond his age, closer to those who were already 15, so the kid was out of his depth. They seemed confident though and ganged up on him while he was at a local park. He was training, the park had become a place he went to often. He chose the location because his family could find him there if they needed him. That also meant that other people could find him there as well, but he was used to getting into the occasional fight. It had become a good training option for him, and he started planning for them to him. This fight wasn't a surprise, nor did it go unexpectedly. The 3 boys were not strong enough to keep up with Mash, and he easily defeated them. The biggest problem was indeed the youngest kid since he had a fire creation ability already. It had caught Mash off guard and burned his arm. It wasn't too bad since the kid was so inexperienced, the fire being much weaker than it could have been. He easily beat them, using his stick to strike at wrists and other joints. He didn't go for hits to the neck or head anymore, knowing it could cause problems. The difference was that his sister arrived as he was finishing the fight. He plunged his stick into the abdomen of the youngest boy, not to pierce his body but to knock the wind out him. It worked and the boy fell backwards, but the end of the fight was interrupted by a scream. His sister running towards the little kid screaming at Mash to stop. He tried to approach them, to reassure his sister that the kid was fine. His sister moved between him and the boy, her gaze fearful as she looked at Mash. He saw that she was crying, her face giving away her real emotions. Mash then took in his surroundings, looked over what he had done more carefully. The other 2 boys were still unconscious, and he noticed some blood on the shirt of one of them. Another's wrist was turning a slight shade purple and was probably broken. He was certain that beneath their clothing, there would be similar bruises across their ribs. He couldn't say anything to his sister's gaze and dropped his weapon. She lifted the youngest kid's shirt, revealing several purple bruises, and the last strike had obviously broken a rib. She started to treat him, using her skills and the medicine that she had on her. Mash didn't say anything, he barely moved, still remembering the look his sister gave him. His siblings had always been on his side, had always had faith in him, and he had been betraying their expectations. Remembering that scene, he decided he couldn't kill the general. He might have wanted to, but his mind was swimming with thoughts of his siblings, and he knew how they would feel. Coming to that conclusion, he realized that he didn't want to kill people just because of his own pettiness. He was dancing a fine line between becoming a criminal and living a better life. For now, he didn't want to disappoint his siblings, and strove to live a better life. Knowing that his mind was broken, that killing was wrong despite how he felt, he decided that he would just head back to work. Before going back to work, Mash went to the merchant building in order to see how the fight was going. He watched as the soldiers, the general included, all fought against the goblin horde. There were more goblins than he had first seen. The general was standing at the front of a triangular formation, as he cleaved through several goblins with a single swing. He carried an obnoxiously large axe, and Mash thought that it probably required around 100 strength just to hold. Mash even made out 2 hobgoblins and a few goblin shamans. The general was struggling to protect the other soldiers while fighting. Mash thought that if he really wanted, he could kill everyone in the room. Although, that wouldn't make him a good knight. Most of the goblins seemed focused on breaking through the formation, but he noticed 2 that were making their way towards the exit. They were cowards and disgusted Mash. He moved to cut them off. They would run away and look for easier prey, as they were not willing to risk their lives. This is what he was defined as when he got his class. He didn't have a weapon on him, but with his mana manipulation didn't need one. The goblins were only about 3 feet tall and looked like starved dogs. He could easily make out their rib cage through their sickly green skin. They saw Mash and ran at him while yelling incoherently. Each of them had a rough stone dagger, they could hurt him with the penetration skill. Mash hadn't practiced with daggers either, but wasn't afraid. Mash waited till they got close before exploding into motion himself. The sudden moves had startled them, and one had stopped bracing for a blow that never came. The other ran towards Mash blindly, seemingly unfazed by his sudden movements. The goblins were pathetically slow, and Mash had easily dodged its first strike, managing to get his own hands beneath the goblin's chin. He pushed up with as much force as he could muster and used his mana to increase the force as well. He heard a loud cracking noise as the goblin's neck broke. Even before it could hit the ground, he had used the motion to trample over the dead goblin and tackle the one that had frozen. He pushed it to the ground as he swung his body around, bringing his left foot down on its head. Despite his thick boots, he could feel the goblin's skull breaking beneath his feet. He knew that his stats were high for his age, but it was only now that he realized how much stronger he really was. The knights down there were still fighting the goblins, and here he was, perfectly fine, after killing 2 goblins in a few seconds. Mash chuckled slightly as he walked out of the alley. He was going to be a little late for work. Mash felt the power rush into him and knew that he could pick his next class if he wanted to. He didn't, at least not yet. If he leveled early now, people would think he had killed someone else. He guessed that was true, considering that he did kill those goblins. However, he didn't want to make his life any harder than it already was, so he could wait. He would get to pick his class in 3 days when he turned 14. He continued to walk to work while contemplating what classes he might get. When he managed to get out of his thoughts, he noticed some people were staring at his feet as he walked. He looked down realizing that his left boot had been stained green by goblin blood. Thankfully there were only a few people out this early. Also, there weren't many people in the outskirts who would talk to guards. He walked to a nearby well and used some of the water to clean his boots. With that taken care of, all he had left was work. Underscore 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 un. Mash didn't celebrate his birthday the night before this time, instead he used the time to study more on classes and what the typical traits were. There were a countless number of classes someone could get, but you did find some commonalities between them. Phrases or subjects that would reappear or would offer a related skill. Mash had spent the last couple of days studying these in preparation. He had been able to choose a class for the past few days but held off to appear more normal. He was meditating in bed, waiting the last couple hours in his room while his parents prepared to celebrate. It would be just him and his parents, but that was fine. After having accepted that he would leave, he found it a lot easier to interact with his parents. Their relationship had improved a lot recently. He moved the clock to his room so that he could wait for the right time. He glanced at it, deciding that it was close enough and got started. He felt the familiar rush of power as he focused inwardly. It had been annoying that he couldn't do this for the past couple days. He felt like he had been transported somewhere else. Opening his eyes he saw 3 iridescent pillars of power. They were the only things in the space, and they stretched on towards the heavens. The first was a mix of red and black that seemed to swirl chaotically. The power felt destructive. The next was a mix of green and blue that seemed oddly familiar, like a strange tree. The last was a pure darkness and poured down like dense rain. He knew that he hadn't really moved and was just within his own mind, but it didn't stop him from staring in wonder. He had read of this experience, but the reality was much more daunting. Reaching towards the red one, he could feel the information lodge itself into his mind. Dragon Observer, you live dangerously, having dared to glance upon a dragon's ungodly majesty. That was it. Mash just stared at it in silence. A dragon? When had he seen a dragon? He tried desperately to figure out when this could have even happened. He needed to take a few deep breaths to even start and calm himself down. He had been shaking and was certain that he would vomit if he could. A dragon could wipe this whole city with a sneeze, and apparently Mash had gotten close enough to want to observe it. They were extraordinarily powerful beings that could even contend with the gods, and they hated humans. Was it a forewarning of an attack? But why would it bother with something like that? It could just destroy the kingdom on its own. He needed to stop thinking about it and focus on his classes. There was nothing he could do anyways. It probably just flew over the town, and he had thought it was a bird. However, a dragon class was an interesting option. It would probably provide him a fraction of the being's own power. He didn't know what observer would mean but thought that it would give him a flight skill of some kind. That sounded good, but Mash didn't want to be stuck beneath another creature, especially a monster. He reached towards the next. He was able to touch this one, and it felt strangely familiar beneath his fingers. Wood-forged pseudo-monk, forged by mana and familiar with wood, you have unimaginably altered your body to emulate the abilities of a monk. Mash was conflicted. This class seemed to be a jumble of the known keywords that he had just studied. Wood was a simple elemental affinity, which would become the direction that his mana would naturally flow towards. It was useful, as was any elemental affinity. Forged was a big win as it meant that he would have some form of mana creation, which meant that he could craft his own weapons and armor. That was doubly useful for him since he couldn't use the blacksmiths. Pseudo-monk was the biggest surprise. Pseudo was a rare prefix that meant that he had broken some of the typical restrictions of the class. It would often provide highly specialized skills and evolutions. Being a monk meant that the class would be able to use his endure skill effectively as well. This was a good option, although the mention of an unimaginably altered body was questionable at best. He reached for the final pillar, which essentially looked like some kind of black rain. Dark Forged Lancer, you have basked in the power of death, gaining from the swift and precise killing of your enemies. That sounded good. He knew that this class would be extremely powerful. Dark was a rare element and would synergize extremely well with a Lancer class. He could tell how this class would function, it would create and launch spears of pure darkness. He would easily be able to level and kill enemies with little risk to himself. The power alone should make the decision, but he hesitated. A Lancer was a variation of the Knight class. He had worked for the past 4 years to avoid this class. He knew that he should just take it and level, eventually he would be offered another class and could shift then, but it still bugged him. Was he willing to betray his ideals for power? No, he wouldn't stoop so low. His other classes were good too, and he knew that power was more about skills than raw strength. Firming his resolve, he reached back for the green and blue pillar that had felt oddly familiar. He jerked awake, feeling the information and abilities flood him. He couldn't help but smile as he stared at the improvements. Name, Mash class, Wood-forged pseudo-monk. Level, 10. Health, 350/350. Energy, 1000/1000. Fortitude, 2035. Endurance, 3555. Strength, 2227. Agility, 2434. Intelligence, 3445. Wisdom, 2838. Charisma, 1621. Free stats, 5. Skills, Endure Persist, Mana Wood Creation, Artificial Meditation, Mana Sphere, Monk's False Core. Persist, go beyond your limits. Continue current action even after depleting energy. Stats improve while at 0 energy. Current bonus, plus 100% stats. Artificial Meditation, you have stolen the techniques of mages and monks to form an artificial technique. Meditating will increase the rate at which your body recovers, even healing minor wounds. Current rate, plus 100% recovery. Mana Wood Creation, you know how deadly sticks can be. Forge your mana into wooden creations. Mana Sphere, passive your eyes just weren't enough. Sense the changes in the mana around you. Current range, 5 feet. Monk's False Core, passive and unnatural mana core has fundamentally altered your body. Stamina and mana combine to become energy. Chapter 7, Birthday Party. Mash stood in the empty room and felt uncomfortable as his shirt was stuck to his back. He promptly took it off, letting it fall to the floor. He still hadn't improved his organizational methods. His floor was still a cluttered mess. Except now his toys were replaced with books. It looked like he had been sweating profusely while his body adjusted to the new class. He immediately noticed the effects of some of his skills. Mana Sphere had changed his senses noticeably. It felt like he was connected to the mana around him, he could feel the things in the sphere. It was as if the space was always at the edge of his senses, and that his field of view had broadened. The 5-foot sphere felt like it was part of his body, that his soul had grown to encompass the space. However, this wasn't the most noticeable change that had occurred. His body's fusion of mana and stamina had changed his body physically. The feeling was surreal. The core where his mana had been held was gone, instead it felt like he was made of mana. The mana core had melted into his body and spread throughout it entirely. He could feel the new energy, it felt denser than mana. It urged him to move, to use it. With his mana sense, he got a vague image of the energy within his body. It looked to him like it had woven into his very being, and it seemed to be vibrating. He felt like he somehow had more energy than should be humanly possible. Based on the description, that was probably the case. The skill itself stated that his body had been altered unnaturally. He wondered if he was still a human, would it be possible for a class to change his race? He hadn't heard about it happening before but thought that it should be possible. Would the Dragon Observer class eventually let him become a dragon? Did divine classes eventually lead to godhood? Those questions had some heavy implications, and he didn't want to linger on them right now. He would need to be a lot more powerful before being able to understand the possibilities. It warranted some research though. If dragons and gods were once human, he would need to reconsider his beliefs. He would contemplate it more later, but there were a few other skills he needed to test. He wanted to use his new energy and only had one real skill for it. It was a creation skill for wood. He had never heard of monowood before but could make an educated guess. The feeling of wood had become familiar to him. He had used it almost daily for most of his life. His hands had the calluses to show for it and he could easily picture a stick that would fit his grip perfectly. He had been able to push mana to a small extent before, but now he tried to grasp it. He used his own body's energy to forge the mana, to make it take the familiar shape. He could feel it take form in his palms, growing outwards to take the shape of a quarterstaff. The wood had taken a greyish tint but was streaked with lines of blue and green. He had never seen anything like it. It felt oddly comfortable, but he knew it was not the right weapon. He had realized that spears and staffs wouldn't suit his style as the motions worked better with slashing attacks. With the quarterstaff in hand, he imagined it flattening out, leaving him only a small place at the center to grip it properly. While stretching it he imagined it sharpening into wooden blades. He was left with around 2 feet of space to grip while the other ends were now covered in sharpened blades. He wanted to test it, to see if it could cut. Since it was more of a mana construct than actual wood, he hoped it would work, otherwise he might have to settle for a spear-like design. He was about to try it out on one of his shirts but remembered that his other skill provided healing. He pressed one of the sharpened ends into his palm and was shocked at how easily it had cut him. It was better than some of the swords he had held. Now to try out his last skill. Dumping his weapon on his bed, he sat down and started meditating like usual. From the first breath he could feel his body absorbing the mana in the air. It seemed to melt into his body, and he stared in awe as the cut on his palm closed. The whole process probably took around a minute. He checked his stats and realized that his energy and health had recovered entirely. He should have checked how much health he had lost but had forgotten in his excitement. He could work out the finer details later, for now he wanted to go and eat some food. The changes to his body made him hungry. He got up and headed to the bathroom so that he could clean himself up before dinner. While cleaning himself off in the bathroom, he decided to allocate his new stats. He wanted to raise his strength past 30. His class seemed to give him 5 free stats, which seemed pretty useful. Name, MASH class, Wood-Forged Pseudo-Monk. Level, 10. Health, 350/350. Energy, 1000/1000. Fortitude, 35. Endurance, 55. Strength, 27/31. Agility, 34/35. Intelligence, 45. Wisdom, 38. Charisma, 21. Free stats, 0. Skills, Endure Persist, Monowood Creation, Artificial Meditation, Monosphere, Monk's False Core. Persist, go beyond your limits. Continue current action even after depleting energy. Stats improve while at 0 stamina. Current bonus, plus 100% stats. Artificial Meditation, you have stolen the techniques of mages and monks to form an artificial technique. Meditating will increase the rate at which your body recovers, even healing minor wounds. Current rate, plus 100% recovery. Monowood Creation, you know how deadly sticks can be. Forge your mana into wooden creations. Monosphere, passive your eyes just weren't enough. Sense the changes in the mana around you. Current range, 5 feet. Monk's False Core, passive and unnatural mana core has fundamentally altered your body. Stamina and mana combine to become energy. He used the last point to round up his agility to 35. It wouldn't make a huge difference, but he didn't want to leave his stats just laying around. He was already at the point where simple exercises were unlikely to raise his stats. He would still do some exercises, but now he would have to fight to progress his class. Healers could heal, and crafters could craft, but combat classes would have to fight to raise their level. Mash had been prepared for this and had an idea of what path he wanted to walk. He would become an adventurer. It was a more independent path than his brother and sister had taken, but it would be the shortest path to individual power. It would also let Mash meet with others who chose more specific classes, instead of the general classes like Knight. He was planning on going to the guild later today, after his birthday celebrations were over. There was still a week before the next entrance test, but he wanted to sign up as soon as he could. He hoped that he would be able to get in for the next exam. Otherwise, he would have to wait an extra month. He had cleaned himself up well. Looking at himself in the mirror, he realized that his eyes were somehow darker. It felt like the black color somehow grew denser, and now his pupils were no longer distinguishable from his irises. That wasn't the biggest change though. Across his body he could see streaks of blue and green lines, like scars. They streaked down his arms and legs. It looked like the mana had scarred him. Thankfully there were less of the marks across the rest of his body. Only one blue streak had run down from his ear and across his neck to end on his chest. He had seen other people that had been marked by their class with tattoos or scars, but had never seen so many before. Honestly, he thought that he looked ridiculous as the colors on his body seemed determined to clash. There was nothing he could do about it though, and just put on his clothes. He headed down the stairs. Before getting to the bottom he made sure to call out. He didn't want them to be surprised by the changes to his appearance. "I'm coming down, and let's just say that I look different." He said the words jovially, trying to downplay the changes, but knew that it probably wouldn't work. He looked like a freak and didn't doubt that others would see him that way. Strangely though, his charisma had risen. He guessed that he did look a bit scarier. He stepped down from the staircase and heard audible gasps. He looked up as he realized that he heard 3 people gasp. His entire family was in the room. His siblings were there. He gasped as he saw them. "What? How are you here?" Mash couldn't stop the question from coming out. His brother might be able to come and go, but it was still a week's trip to get here. However, there was no chance that his sister would be able to leave without a military escort, and not the small unnoticeable kind. His brother answered as the rest of his family was still staring at him in shock. "Happy birthday, Mash. I've been ordered to protect Luna, and she just had to come to your birthday." His brother grinned while talking, and Mash found himself grinning as he looked at them. His brother's words seemed to wake the rest of his family, and his sister ran over to hug Mash. "Happy birthday." She spoke cheerfully, but Mash realized that she was checking him for injuries. His sister must have thought that he was injured. As he hugged his sister, his monosphere let him notice the present that she had hidden in her bag. He knew it was a present because his sense had outlined a wrapped package. He realized that he could tell that it was enchanted. He contained his excitement since he didn't want to spoil her surprise, instead thanking them for the wishes. "Thank you, but doesn't a princess like you need an army to protect them?" He had started to call her a princess since everyone in the city had started treating her like one, when she had gotten her class. She hated the name, so Mash made sure to use it as often as he could. She rolled her eyes at him. His mother spoke next. "Well, don't leave us waiting, what did you get?" Mash spent the next half an hour or so explaining to them what class he had gotten, and what had happened to his body. His mother and sister, both being healers, had thoroughly barraged him with questions regarding the changes to his body. That evolved into them testing whether healing still worked on him, and if they could recover his new energy with stamina recovery skills. Thankfully it seemed that his body still functioned normally in that regard. His stomach growled, interrupting the examination. They started eating as everyone realized their hunger. After the meal, it was finally time for him to get his presents. His parents had handed him a simple letter in a very cozy bedroll. It took Mash a second to realize what it was. They had gotten Mash an invitation for the entrance exam at the Adventurers Guild. Mash had told his family his plans, and his father had seemed pleased with his choice. His father would be the only one capable of getting Mash something like this. If not for this, Mash would have to wait in line and go whenever they had a spot for him. Now he could go to the next exam. The bedroll was even more impressive though. It was enchanted to produce a small amount of heat. He couldn't wait to break it in, and he would probably sleep in it tonight. His brother had gotten him a bracelet. It was made of a white metal and was engraved with black flowers. Mash's first thought was that this was a joke of some kind, but as the bracelet entered his mana sense, he realized that it was also an enchanted item. Of course, his brother had gotten him something that he would want to use despite its girlish appearance. He put it on but didn't notice anything. It requires attunement. His brother's response was flat. His sister was trying to hold back laughter though. She was probably the one that picked it out. Muttering under his breath, he poured some of his energy into the bracelet. It reacted violently, and Mash screamed as he felt a searing pain run through his arm. The bracelet seemed to be melting into his forearm. "Are you okay?" He heard his sister speak but could make out similar yells from the rest of his family. She was the closest and grabbed his arm trying to heal him. He felt the magic enter his body and ease his pain. It didn't stop whatever was happening though. The bracelet was gone, on his wrist was now a tattoo of interlocking black flowers. There were blue streaks that passed through the tattoo, making a truly appalling mess of colors. That wasn't supposed to happen, it was just a spatial bracelet to help you carry your stuff. His brother sounded a little panicked and lifted his sleeve revealing his own bracelet. Mash noticed that there were no flowers on his. It was engraved with small rubies. Why hadn't they given him something cooler? Now he was stuck with a flower tattoo across his wrist. Mash realized that it felt like he was still wearing the item. He carefully pushed more mana into it and a small space opened before him. It was about the size of the chest that was in his room, and he instinctively knew that he could open and close it at will. As he put the bedroll and letter in, he realized that his family was staring at him. "I guess, my weird body means that I probably shouldn't attune to random items." He spoke casually, trying to force the situation back to normalcy. His father spoke, taking the opportunity to crack a joke. "Well, now you can't lose it in that mess you call a room." This led to them spending the next few minutes teasing Mash for his organization methods. After which, his sister and mother had spent another half-hour checking the bracelet to see if it would cause him any problems. They concluded that it seemed to have fused with his body harmlessly, but they didn't know what that would mean for the item if his body changed again. He would cross that bridge when he got there, and there was still his sister's gift that he had noticed earlier. He opened the package carefully, because he knew that his sister would get angry if he just tore it apart. It was a plain white shirt, and pure black pants. He just looked at it blankly, then asked the question. "Does it require attunement?" "No, but you can use your mana to change the color and design of each piece. This is a set of customizable mending clothes." His sister's response immediately got Mash excited. Mending clothes would be perfect for him, and he knew that he couldn't normally afford them. It was customizable too, meaning that it must have cost her a lot. He must have been gaping like a fish because his whole family burst out laughing at his expression. He ignored them, taking a second to look at the clothes. He immediately started styling each. The shirt would block the flower tattoo but wouldn't hide all the streaks, so he decided to show them on the shirt itself. He was left with a mostly white shirt with green and blue streaks that would seem to bleed onto his skin. He kept his pants black but lightened the shade a bit and added streaks that would connect with the ones that ran down his shirt. His sister was the first to speak. "This looks amazing. How did you come up with the design so quickly?" His sister sounded genuinely impressed, and it was Mash's turn to grin. "I might have worn mostly hand-me-downs, but that doesn't mean I don't have an eye for fashion." His sister rolled her eyes at the words. She just kept rolling them, waiting for him to elaborate. Apparently, she really wanted to know. Mash just shrugged. "I just tried something that would work with the mana scars. I didn't really expect it to look so nice. Next time, I might have to ask you to make me an outfit." Mash had to roll his eyes at that but realized that he could actually think of some designs for her. Maybe he did have a talent for fashion. He didn't know what to make of that information. Perhaps he could start a business in the future, but he also wasn't planning on thinking about it too hard. With presents out of the way, the rest of the party went by quickly. Mash spent the rest of the time just speaking with his brother and sister about what had happened since they last saw each other. It had gotten late, the sun would be up soon. Mash entered his room to get some sleep. He was going to skip work today. He saw his weapon on his bed. It seemed to have decayed. Mash didn't know how long it had lasted. It was useless now, but still hadn't dissolved into mana. He didn't know if it would. He moved it to the floor, deciding he would check it in the morning. It had been a good day and he was ready to get some sleep. He took out the bedroll from his space and laid it out on top of his bed. It was bigger than his bed and the bedroll hung off the end. He entered it and felt very warm inside, from more than just the magic. Sleep consumed him in a few seconds. Chapter 8, Allies and Adventurers. The guild was towards the center of the town and was easily identifiable. It stood in the middle of a small market and towered over the stalls and vendors. Adventurers typically set up around the guild to sell their wares. Mash still had some time before the entrance exam started and took the opportunity to explore the market. He didn't have anything in mind, and he didn't have a lot of gold to spend anyways. He had used most of his savings to get some basic items that he would need. He mostly stocked up on some food, which was essentially just some dried meat and hard cheeses. He had also gotten a book on wild plants, so that he could avoid anything dangerous when trying to find fruits and vegetables. He read enough stories about poisoned berries and planned on avoiding that fate. However, he had splurged for a small bag of sugar cubes. It wasn't chocolate but did satisfy his need for some sugar. He had kept a few cubes in a pouch so that he wouldn't have to open his storage space in public. He popped one in his mouth, letting it melt from the warmth of his tongue. The sweetness made him smile as he walked over to one of the stalls. It was an antique vendor, and the man had laid out a wide arrangement of stones. Each rock was painted a different color and was about the size of his fist. "Do you want to try your luck? One of these stones holds a treasure. If you can guess the right one you can have it." The man talked like he was a priest, getting louder with each word like it was a prayer. Mash looked at the stones and wondered what the treasure was. He spoke apprehensively. "What is the treasure? By the way, I'm Mash. You can call me Devon, and that is for me to know and you to find out." He gave a little flourish as he spoke, and Mash noticed that Devon was a gold-ranked adventurer. His badge poked through his cloak with a little motion. He looked youngish, but some of his hairs had started graying, which would mean that he was probably around 100 years old. Gold-rank adventurers were over level 150, which was typically when people started to age a lot slower. When you hit level 200, it was said that you stopped aging altogether. The current king had reigned for well over 200 years now and would still rule for many more years. Devon was dressed in loose robes and Mash noticed a few daggers strapped to his belt. He had tan copperish skin and was covered in detailed tattoos. Mash had seen people looking at him strangely because of his mana scars and guessed that Devon was probably in a similar situation. Wanting to make a good impression, he grabbed one of the rocks and asked, "How much for one?" "A single silver coin for you. I wouldn't want a potential adventurer to spend all of their money gambling." His tone gave no indication as to whether Mash had picked the correct stone or not. Mash tossed him the coin and crushed the rock like an egg and could feel it break in half smoothly. Inside, he was rewarded with more rock. He guessed that he had picked the wrong one and just shrugged. He contemplated trying again but decided against it. He put the rock back on the table, shaking his head slightly. Devon waved his hand over the crushed rock, and it reformed into a ball. Devon's little trick had tempted him to try and find the actual prize, but he shoved that down. He decided would go to the guild now, not really wanting to waste any more money. "I am going to go to the guild now. I'll see you around." Mash spoke quickly, but politely. He didn't want to leave a bad impression after all. He wasn't going to be late and wanted to be one of the first people to arrive. He knew that people would often show up early, and he wanted to scope out the competition. He didn't know any of the details of the exam since the guild would make sure that word never got out. It was supposed to remain a secret. "Good luck." Devon spoke enthusiastically, while shooing Mash with his hands. Mash noticed the motion and decided to pick up his pace. The guild itself was big, comparable with the fort. However, this building was an elaborately designed wooden structure that looked fancier than any merchant building he had ever seen. The inside was even more inspiring, as the walls were covered in large, amazing paintings. One painting stood out to him, drawing his eyes like a valuable treasure would. It revealed a forest where all the trees sported streaks of blue and green along the wood. It had to be mana wood. There was nothing else it could be. The painting depicted a town that surrounded the base of the trees, and there were people seemingly enjoying a festival. As he got closer to it, he noticed that the people were not humans but elves. He had only ever seen one group of elves since they rarely left their towns. Mash had seen a few half-elves though because they were much more common within human territories. He looked around the frame of the painting and found the name. It was called Evertree, the village of endless trees. He made sure to make a mental note of the town. He would go there when he got the chance. Traveling the world was one of the reasons why he wanted to be an adventurer in the first place. That and learning more about the nature of classes. Only as an adventurer would he be free enough to pursue whatever research he wanted. People believed that classes were a gift granted by the gods, since only the intelligent races had access to them. Mash wanted to delve some ancient ruins and dungeons to find out more, and he would be able to soon. While continuing to look at the paintings, he felt a hand land on his shoulder. "Hey kid, the entrance exam is going to start soon, and you should probably get to the exam room." The voice was deep and slow, and the words shook Mash out of his revelry. How long had he been looking at the painting? He couldn't remember. He turned to face the man that had addressed him. He was taller than Mash and looked like a mass of muscle. He looked relatively young, but that could mean a million things. He had a slight tan, and short brown hair that was combed back nicely. He wore a big smile, and even Mash had to admit the man was handsome. He wore a full suit and stood regally. His charisma was probably ridiculous. Mash determined that he must be a high-level adventurer and introduced himself properly. "Hello, I'm Mash, and thanks for the warning." Mash tried to sound as respectful as possible. The man let out a laugh as he spoke with mirth. "No worries. It's kind of my job, as I am one of the examiners. You can call me Edmund, by the way." The name didn't seem like it fit, but Mash made sure to keep his thoughts from his face. "Here, follow me, I will take you to the exam room so that you can get started." Edmund had said the words easily, but they caused Mash to gasp a little. "Wait. I can start early." Mash couldn't keep the surprise from his voice, and he practically yelled the last word. An early start would be a huge advantage, and he regretted not coming earlier. Answering the question that had appeared on Mash's face, Edmund spoke promptly. "It doesn't matter if you get a head start, your first exam is to form a team with at least 2 other people in the room." He said the words while leading Mash into the hall. Underscore 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 un. New p.o.v. Jill sat at the table waiting for someone to approach her. This was her second time taking the exam, and she was hoping to pass. She hadn't gotten past the first exam and was getting kind of desperate. Her family's shop had failed, and they were in trouble. They needed money and fast, otherwise they would end up as servants to the kingdom. It wouldn't be terrible, but she wanted to live freely and wanted the same for her siblings. She had been their only solution, ever since she had gotten a powerful class. She wanted to become an adventurer mainly because she heard that you could operate alone, and it would be the easiest way to get a lot of gold quickly, but of course, there would be some stupid rule to stop her. An adventurer could only work alone if they were gold ranked, until then she would have to find a team. So here she was again, trying to find someone who would be okay with her conditions. She had decided that she would try again with the same conditions today. If it didn't work, she would just have to try something else. She didn't think it would be so hard, her only condition involved the gold that they earned. She either wanted a slightly bigger cut, or to be responsible for the gold the party earned. She had explained several times that she would be fair, but just wanted a little extra while she paid off her debts. Everybody had their own circumstances, and she knew that, but she was desperate. Nobody so far was willing to accept her condition. She tried to stay positive and looked at the next people who entered the room. One was the examiner Edmund, and the other was a boy that she didn't recognize. He certainly wasn't there last week. She would have remembered the oddly colored scars. Using her enhanced perception skill, she noticed how truly weird the boy was. On top of his multicolored scars, he had grey almost white hair and deep black eyes. His clothes strangely worked well with his complex coloration, and he was otherwise well built. He wasn't carrying any weapons or supplies either, that meant that either he had a spatial item or had too many things to carry on him. Either one would mean that he was somewhat rich. Their eyes met and she shivered just a little. His eyes belonged on a monster. She shook herself of the image as she noticed him walking towards her. He must have noticed her staring. She wondered what he would do. It's not like he could really do anything to her. She was quite confident in her abilities and relaxed into her seat. He took the seat across from her. He looked even more intimidating as she realized how tall he was. "Hey there, I'm Mash. What's your name?" She almost chuckled as his tone betrayed his visage. He sounded so uncertain as he spoke, as if he had never spoken to a girl before. She knew that she had grown prettier as she raised her stats but didn't think that was the cause of his uncertainty. She had seen people approach her for her looks and thought that was probably not the case here. He was most likely just the awkward type and didn't know what to say. He was staring at her blankly now, and she realized that she hadn't replied to him. "Oh, it's Jill, and I'm assuming you wanted to ask about forming a party." She was pleased with how confident she had sounded. She felt a sense of control when she noticed the boy nod. She went on, trying to maintain the lead. "I have only one major condition, and that is to allow me to control the party's gold." She tried to sound a little desperate, hoping that it would help her cause. She had seen plenty of adventurers wasting their gold, and she wouldn't be able to be in a party that threw money away while she needed it so much. He looked apprehensive and sounded doubtful as he spoke. "I don't mind, but why?" Mash's words had come out slowly. "Before you say no." She cut herself off as she processed his words. She spoke with a little more hope as she continued, not giving him the opportunity to interject. "I have some debts that I need to clear, but I promise that I will be fair and reasonable, and only take extra when I think that it won't cause any problems." She spoke quickly, trying to get him to understand her urgency. She didn't want to take his pity but was willing to act as sympathetic as possible. He looked to be contemplating her words, and she could feel her anxiety rising while she waited for him to respond. She took the time to ponder the man again. He had come to her table specifically and seemed eager to join her team. As she thought on it, she wondered if she could trust this person. It seemed too good to be true. Also, she still wasn't certain if he was even human. Honestly, she didn't really have a choice. She could only hope that he was being genuine because, if he was planning something, she wouldn't get a second chance. His voice was still uncertain, but also held a hint of resolve. "I'm fine with that, but I still have some questions." Those words were enough to get her to finally feel some hope, and she relaxed while he started to bombard her with questions. He asked her about how much she needed, and how much she planned on keeping for the party. He was just ironing out some details. It took about 5 minutes, but they had basically concluded that she would just let the party know how much she would be keeping for the debt. It sounded like he would be fine, even if she took most of what they would earn, so long as they had enough to get by comfortably. At the end of their discussion, he had offered her a sugar cube, and she decided that she liked the man named Mash. Just one more member and they would be good to go. It was a better situation than she had expected. Now she just had to hope he was being honest and not some kind of evil villain. Chapter 9. The Remaining Party. Mash got up from the table. He had found himself in a strange situation. The girl named Jill was following him as he wandered around the room. After entering the room, he had noticed the girl staring at him and wanted to know why. As he approached her, he was able to understand how much mana an average adventurer typically had. He had taken a chance and walked up to the girl since she had kept staring at him. She had also been one of the few people who were sitting by themselves. He had taken the seat across from her when he noticed how much mana she had. His mana sphere was good at gauging strength, and in terms of mana capacity she was one of the strongest in the room. Her condition was certainly a bit strange, but he didn't care much. Honestly, he wanted to spend as much time as possible within dungeons, so he didn't care if she took most of the gold. She had agreed that maintaining and upgrading equipment would be the first priority. It seemed like she cared more about preventing him from wasting gold, than increasing her cut. It didn't sound like a big deal, but maybe he was just being short-sighted. He had never really cared all that much about money and was much happier with just being able to explore and find new information. The condition itself had surprised him more than anything else. When he saw her shining golden hair, and otherwise perfect posture, he expected her to be some kind of noble. She was wearing a new set of leather armor too and couldn't spot even the smallest bit of dirt. She was wearing a decent-sized backpack, and he noticed that it seemed full. Finding out that she was instead desperate for money was like hearing a cruel joke. However, her condition had let Mash feel like he could make his own demand. Mash had only thought of one condition since hearing about the exam. He wanted to go dungeon diving as soon as possible. Ideally, he would be there tomorrow. Clearing dungeons and killing powerful monsters are some of the only known methods to getting unique classes. He also hoped that the party would be able to equip itself with items from the dungeon. They were filled with magical items, to the point that even the monsters in there could be wielding them. He would have gone there already, but you had to be an adventurer to get access to the local dungeon. There was only one dungeon nearby, and it was well known. It was a labyrinth-type dungeon though and would often shift and change, refilling itself with items and monsters. Nothing in there would be too impressive, but it would still give them a unique reward if they managed to clear it. He knew of at least 3 dungeons that he wanted to clear, and the labyrinth was the easiest of them. Despite that, it had a low clear rate since most adventurers would leave before getting to the end. There was a simple reason for that: if you wanted to clear the dungeon you would have to spend at least a night in there. That was a risky bet since the dungeon would shift and you would lose your way out. However, with his storage space, he thought that they could manage. They had been walking around the room and were talking idly about potential members. Mash continued to use his skill to gauge the strength of those they passed. He ignored the groups of 3 and the ones that had already rejected Jill. He prioritized the tables with 2 or fewer people, because they would be more desperate to completing their group. They had tried a few tables already but had been rejected. Mash had made sure to compare Jill's strength with whomever was at the table but had only been reminded of how much mana she had. It was comparable to his own, but that shouldn't be possible. He idly wondered what class she had. He wanted to smack himself. How had he forgotten the obvious question? He was about to say something when he noticed 2 people with very strange mana. One of them was a girl who was about as tall as his sister. The first thing that he noticed was her bright red hair. It was tied back into a neat ponytail. It was a shockingly vivid shade of red. She had a smattering of freckles across her face, and he couldn't stop himself from thinking that she looked cute. She was wearing a basic set of leather armor like Jill, but she didn't have anything covering her hands. She was powerful, though not as much as them. More importantly, however, he noticed that her mana was like his, in that it seemed to be spread throughout her body. That alone made him want to take a seat, but it was her teammate that really interested him. He was a burly man, who Mash thought was a warrior, but upon getting closer, noticed that he had a large mana reservoir. On top of that, he was a beastman. He had a pair of grey pointed ears that matched the color of his hair, and vaguely yellow eyes, which reminded Mash of a wolf. His mana was the more interesting part. It was as if he had 2 different kinds of mana. He was eager to learn more. Mash had seen beastmen occasionally but had not spoken to them before. They tended to be pushed towards the outskirts of town, and they tended to avoid humans. It wasn't because they hated humans, rather because of the opposite. They were not treated well in the city. He was excited for the opportunity to talk to the man, and took a seat at the table. Jill was surprised by the sudden motion but followed easily and took the seat next to him. "Hello, I'm Jill and this is Mash." Jill spoke as she sat down. She had been leading the conversations since her condition was the more problematic of the 2. Mash had a few questions that he wanted to ask though and interrupted her usual routine. "What classes do you guys have?" "You too, Jill." "Oh, and I'm a wood-forged pseudo-monk." Mash spoke eagerly. He wanted to know. His curiosity was piqued by their unique mana. He looked over the trio as they processed what he had just said. Then, Jill smacked herself in the forehead. "I never got your class. How did I only just realize that? I'm an enhanced brawler." She sounded oddly tense as she spoke, but it was indeed a good class. They both somewhat fulfilled the same roles, but between the 2 of them were unlikely to fall for any traps. Not to mention that it was likely that they both had a self-healing skill. Mash looked at the other 2 expectantly. They nodded, and it was the red-haired girl who spoke first. Her voice was oddly melodic. "I'm a blood paladin, and you can call me Red." It was an obvious nickname, but that was typical of adventurers. Many used nicknames, choosing to hide their real name and heritage. A blood paladin would be a huge get though. It would function as a tank while also having some healing capabilities. A class that could heal would be good for emergencies, since his healing was dependent on his meditation. He wanted to ask about her skills but knew that they would only talk about it after forming a party. He looked to the beastman, most excited for his response. "My class is a spirit druid, and my name is Lucas, but you can just call me Luke." Luke spoke neatly, but his deep voice shocked Mash. Mash almost jumped at hearing his class but managed to keep his calm. He was excited though. Druid was a class that humans couldn't get, which meant that this was probably one of the only opportunities he had to learn more about the class. He wanted them to join the team, even if their classes seemed to overlap a lot. They would each be capable individually, and they wouldn't have to be worried about protecting any one member. He spoke excitedly. "Do you guys want to form a team? We really only have one condition." Mash spoke and didn't try to hide his enthusiasm in the least. Jill noticed her opportunity to jump in and told the group of her condition and the reason why. Mash was worried that they wouldn't accept it. He would leave Jill to join their team, but kept his mouth shut as she spoke. He would feel bad, because he knew that Jill was probably stronger than the 2 of them. She definitely had more mana than them, but they had the more interesting classes. Although, it didn't look like he would have to. They nodded as Jill started explaining some of the terms that Mash had appended in. Red looked the least bothered, and he wasn't surprised. He had noticed a spatial bracelet on her wrist and guessed that she was fairly rich. Luke, on the other hand, seemed more apprehensive. He nodded though accepting the condition but asked another question. You're willing to party with us? Luke sounded a little worried. Jill's eyes grew wide, but Mash beat her to it, and spoke excitedly. Yes. Do you have any conditions for us? The only thing I want to do is visit the labyrinth as soon as we can. Luke just looked unsatisfied, and Red seemed ready to explain. He means, why are you willing to party with non-humans? Now it was Mash's turn to look confused. Luke was obviously a beastman, but Red looked completely normal. He glanced at Jill, but she looked equally confused. Red thankfully explained. You didn't notice that I was a half-elf. She sounded sad as she talked, as if those words would end the conversation. Jill spoke quickly, not letting them linger in awkward silence. Honestly, I don't even think that Mash is human, so no, I don't care. I would be happy to be in a party with you both. Mash nodded along as he processed the information. Red was a half-elf, and that surprised Mash, but if anything, he was more excited now. After all, he still wanted to visit that elven town. Nobody in his family was prejudiced and Mash wanted to hear about her class. Also, she probably had a healing skill, so it was an easy acceptance. Then, Jill's words caught up to him. Wait, you thought I wasn't human? It was more statement than question, and Mash couldn't help but sound offended. He looked at Jill and noticed that she was just looking at him with one eyebrow raised. That look was all that needed to be said, and Red and Luke started laughing. Mash wanted to move on and asked again for their conditions. Red shook her head slightly and spoke while stifling a laugh. I don't have anything new but would also like to get to a dungeon as soon as possible. That got Mash's attention. With two people wanting to enter the labyrinth, he could probably convince them to go as soon as the exam was over. He wanted to ask about that more, but Luke took the opportunity to add his own condition. I think it should be obvious, but I want us to help all people equally, and if we see a beastman who needs help, we do so. Mash guessed that Luke still didn't trust them, and Mash was in the same boat. They had only just met after all. Both Mash and Jill nodded in confirmation. Mash was satisfied with his party. He was excited to hear about their skills and offered to explain his own first. Mash's explanation was simple, as his skills weren't very complicated. They had asked a couple questions about his energy stat and how that worked, but they seemed to understand the rest of his skills easily enough. He had given them a demonstration of his creation skill hoping to impress them, and they were surprised by how sharp he could make them. Jill looked a little apprehensive when he used the skill, but she didn't say anything, so he moved on. He couldn't explain his fighting style and said that he would demonstrate it later. He was happy to share since he was far more excited in hearing what their skills were. Red shared next, seemingly to have picked up some of Mash's excitement. She had the widest range of skills, and he understood why her mana was more like his. She had a passive skill that strengthened her blood and body with a percentage of her maximum mana. She didn't have any sensory skills but did have the expected healing skill. It was a blood-based healing and she said that she should be able to reattach limbs, but not regenerate them. She had a vampiric drain skill that would either heal her or make her attacks stronger, and a basic blood manipulation skill that let her make simple weapons. Her final skill was an alternate version of Smite, called Blood Smite, which made it so that any wounds she made would bleed profusely. Her skills together made her into a capable fighter. Jill went next as she was infected by their enthusiasm. Mash had been right, her class was good. She had gotten a short-range teleportation skill. It cost a lot of mana, but Mash couldn't help but be jealous. A skill like that with his persist skill would have made him undefeatable. Her other skills weren't as fancy. She had a simple skill that improved her senses and another to strengthen her body. It also boosted her natural healing. Her remaining skills were passives but were impressive. One of her skills improved her reflexes drastically and gave her a small bit of foresight in dangerous situations. Her final skill was called Enhanced Mana and had improved the quality of her mana, effectively doubling her pool. Luke was next and Mash was tempted to start taking notes. Luke's class was the most unique and offered him a bunch of supportive skills. The first boosted a person's regeneration, and he said that this skill usually evolved into one that could regrow limbs. His other two both boosted the physical capabilities of a person. He said that he would be able to improve a person's abilities by almost 50%. That was a huge improvement and would stack with Mash's and Jill's own skills. His next skill was the truly special one. It was called Spirit Morph and would allow him to temporarily take on aspects of the spirits with which he contracted. His final skill being the requisite Spirit Contract skill. His class was clearly meant to buff himself but would work well with everyone else. Mash realized it then, their party was not dynamic. They were all good in the same things, and he would probably have to handle most of the ranged combat. They were unlikely to die to simple things and would certainly be good against large creatures. However, Mash knew that they would struggle with ranged combatants. They would have to hope that their defenses would hold out so that they could close the distance. It wasn't ideal if they had to fight other people, but they would excel at killing monsters and clearing dungeons. Now, he just wanted to hurry up and finish the exam so that he could go to the labyrinth. Chapter 10, Teammates. They spent several hours discussing how their party would function. Honestly, Mash would have liked to spend more time talking but noticed that the room was mostly empty. Mash glanced over the remaining people, but didn't see anyone by themselves. They could only have one more person, but it looked like this team was final. He checked which instructors were still in the room, and noticed Edmund was still there. He was sitting at one of the now empty tables and seemed to be eating something. "I think we should go." Mash cut into the conversation, feeling a little bad about spacing out. He gestured over to Edmund, and the rest of the group nodded in acknowledgement. He walked past the other tables and approached Edmund, still using his monosphere to gauge their abilities. Happy to find that they were more powerful than those still in the room. Also, he was glad to see someone whom he had met earlier. "Hello again, we are ready for the exam." Mash spoke first but was paying more attention to the food. His mana sense was able to pick up trace amounts of mana within the food. Mash wondered where he could get some. He wanted to ask about it but wasn't given the opportunity. Edmund spoke, preventing Mash's question. He sounded tired but pressed on. "It's nice to meet you all, I guess this makes me your examiner. You may call me Edmund. Your exam is going to be fairly straightforward. There's been a scourge rat infestation in one of the outer villages and you are going to deal with it. Meet me at the front gates by sunrise, and we can get started." "Why can't we go now?" Red's question seemed a little desperate, and Mash made a mental note to ask about it later. She seemed on edge, and he found that he cared. For the first time in a long time, Mash had gained new friends, and felt oddly pleased with the notion. He started to feel like he was alone, since both of his siblings left, and was happy to meet like-minded individuals. He waited for Edmund's response though. "No, they are nocturnal creatures, and we would miss them if we left now. I'm going to go home now, and if you have any more questions, check the library. See you in the morning." Edmund spoke with finality. He sounded like someone who wanted to get home. They left soon after him but didn't say anything until they left the guild. Once outside, Mash grabbed Red's shoulder and asked his question. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" Mash tried to sound as genuine as he could. These people would be his teammates and hopefully friends for the foreseeable future. He wanted to have a good relationship with them. She just shook her head as if to dismiss the question, but answered it reluctantly. "It's nothing, it's just that I will have to find an inn for the night." Her words came out coldly, and Mash didn't understand what the problem was. His confusion must have been written on his face because she continued after glancing at him. "I don't like staying at the inns in this town, but can't go home either. It's not a big deal though. I can figure something out." She obviously didn't want to share anything more and stayed quiet. Mash realized that he was in the same boat. He wanted to live independently and made sure to tell his parents that he would not come home for a while. He didn't really want to backtrack on that. I would also prefer not to go home. It would just be very awkward. So, I guess we're in the same boat. Hopefully sticking together would make it easier for you." He left it at that, not wanting to explain how humiliated he would feel if he went home. Instead, he just wanted to let Red know that he would be willing to stick with her. She seemed grateful and gave him a small smile. He knew of some inns that he could go to and was going to see if Red was okay with them, but Jill had provided a solution before he could ask. "You guys can stay at my place, so long as you're okay with the floor." The second part of that was directed at Mash specifically. Then he understood the implications of his earlier words. He pointedly did not look at Red as he thanked Jill. She told them not to expect much, but there was enough space for all of them. Luke decided to tag along since everyone else was going. Luke was a bit surprised that Jill had offered and seemed to look at the girl in a different light. Then Mash remembered something he should have done earlier. Jill, Luke, give me your bags, I can carry them. They looked at Mash skeptically at first, but as soon as he opened his storage space, realized his intentions. However, they were very surprised upon seeing the space. Luke jumped backward as it opened, and Jill yelped. Even Red looked shocked, although Mash didn't know why. After all, she had a storage bracelet of her own. You have a storage space. How? You're not wearing a bracelet. Jill practically yelled the words, and Red needed to elbow her to get her to stop. Mash spent the next several minutes showing them his flowery tattoo and describing how it was his spatial bracelet. They didn't understand it but couldn't argue with reality. He grabbed their bags, managing to cram it into his space. They all fit, but it took up most of the room. With that done, they made their way to Jill's place. Jill's place was about half a mile from the guild. Thankfully, it was towards the front gate. Red made them stop at a bakery so that she could buy some simple cakes to give to Jill's family. Mash thought that it was unnecessary but did think it was polite. He knew that it was something that nobles did, and thought that it was a kind gesture. When they arrived at the house, Jill rushed inside to let her family know before they entered. Her house was larger than Mash expected. It seemed to be a shop of some kind, and he guessed that there were rooms on the upper floors. It was well kept but was lacking anything to identify the shop. The only blemishes on the building were the broken windows. He was curious but would refrain from asking any questions. It probably wasn't a memory they wanted to remember. Jill opened the door and waved her hand at them, letting them know that they should come inside. As he walked up, he saw that there were several people in the room behind her. On top of Jill's parents, there were 3 young kids in the room. Jill mentioned that she had 3 siblings, but he was surprised to see how young they were. Jill introduced them, once they all shuffled in. These are my parents, Haymond and Juniper, and those things are my siblings, Jack, Cindy, and Coben. She used her hands to point as she said their names. Everyone in her family had blonde hair and were all dressed nicely. Her parents were on the older side, and Mash guessed they weren't at a very high level. Cindy looked just like Jill, but smaller. And Jack and Coben were twins. The only thing differentiating them was Jack's glasses. The kids were looking at them with excitement and started yelling over one another to push out questions. However, Red handing Juniper the bag of cakes got them all to quiet down. They were staring at the cakes like a dog would for treats. Juniper spoke gently, but she sounded as though she was the queen. How about coming up to the dining room, and I will cut everyone a piece. The children immediately listened, hypnotized by the sweets. As they climbed upstairs, Mash took the chance to look over the shop. Most of the shelves were empty, and it seemed like the shop hadn't been open for a while. However, it was clean. They seemed to make sure to make the shop presentable, even if they couldn't operate properly. He now understood why Jill seemed so desperate. They must be placing all their hopes on her. He climbed up the stairs, not wanting to look at the sad sight any longer. The dining room was large and Mash took an open seat at the table. While Juniper prepared the sweets, Haymond made a small meal for them. Mash thought that he was a better cook than his mother but kept it to himself. It was a simple stew of meat and potatoes but was flavored extremely well. Mash chose to eat his fill of stew and skipped out on the cake. The rest of the night was peaceful. Mash and Luke drew the attention of the children as they both looked inhuman. It was funny, because Red got away while Mash was stuck explaining how he really was human. Luke seemed happy to talk about Beastmen and spoke excitedly with the children. Jill slept in her room with Red, while Mash and Luke used their bedrolls to sleep in the living room. He slept easily but was excited for the exam in the morning. Stuck to his usual routine, Mash woke up early in the morning. The sun wasn't out yet and he spent the time meditating. He had used a lot of energy demonstrating his magic for the children and wanted to make sure to recover. Meditation would erase the morning drowsiness as well. Mash heard someone and noticed Juniper entering the kitchen. Deciding that he meditated for long enough, he checked his stats while waking up Luke. Name, Mash class, Wood-Forged Pseudo-Monk. Level, 10. Health, 350/350. Energy, 1000/1000. Fortitude, 35. Endurance, 55. Strength, 31. Agility, 34. Intelligence, 45. Wisdom, 38. Charisma, 21/22. Free stats, 0. Skills, Persist, Monowood Creation, Artificial Meditation, Monosphere, Monk's False Core. Persist, go beyond your limits. Continue current action even after depleting energy. Stats improve while at 0 stamina. Current bonus, plus 100% stats. Artificial Meditation, you have stolen the techniques of mages and monks to form an artificial technique. Meditating will increase the rate at which your body recovers, even healing minor wounds. Current rate, plus 100% recovery. Monowood Creation, you know how deadly sticks can be. Forge your mana into wooden creations. Monosphere, passive your eyes just weren't enough. Sense the changes in the mana around you. Current range, 5 feet. Monk's False Core, passive and unnatural mana core has fundamentally altered your body. Stamina and mana combined to become energy. His stats hadn't really changed, only his charisma managed to go up, and that too, only by a single point. It was probably because of his newfound fashion sense. He knew that it was supposed to be harder to raise stats after getting near second class, but he believed that he would at least manage to improve his stamina. It looked like combat would be the only way to improve his stats now. After Luke got ready, Mash asked Juniper if she could wake Red and Jill. He was surprised when he heard Juniper yell loudly, but moments later Jill was rushing down the stairs while wearing her pajamas. When she realized what happened, she did not look happy and was glaring at Mash and Luke. Red got up soon after, but they took almost a full hour to get ready. To be fair, Red only took a few minutes, but Jill needed a lot more time. As soon as she was done though, they left, her mom giving her a sandwich for breakfast. It seemed like they would be late. They were indeed late but didn't see Edmund either. Jill asked one of the guards if he arrived earlier and found that they haven't seen him. It looked like Edmund just wanted to make sure that he wasn't waiting. Mash thought that he would do the same in his situation. They waited at the gate and took the opportunity to do some light stretches. There were not many people out this early, so the space was available for it. Edmund arrived soon after they finished, and he ushered them all into a carriage without saying anything. He looked tired and went to sleep after giving directions to the driver. Red thought that he was hungover, but Jill and Luke said that they didn't smell anything. Deciding it was better to let him sleep, they discussed how they would deal with the scourge rats. The plan boiled down to letting Mash do as much damage as he could, trying to get them to bleed. Then Red would use the blood to cut up as many as possible. It was a simple plan but would be great at dealing with small creatures like rats. The group wasn't great with hordes and relied heavily on Mash and Red. They spent the rest of the trip considering what their team's name would be. Jill's parents brought up the topic last night, but they couldn't come up with anything good. However, Mash thought they came up with a few good ones. Dungeon Delvers, since that was hopefully what they would do most often. Paragon, as they were suited to fighting alone and would become powerful individuals. Jumble, because they formed a team with a random composition and were all different races. Red thought up this one, and Mash had to agree that it was a good name despite actually being human.